Chapter 605. Before he finished his sentence, Chinpipi walked in. He looked thinner than usual, but no matter how thin he was still a fatty, especially when compared to Tang Xiaodang beside him. Cui Xiu could not help but shiver when he heard that. He was about to say something polite and leave, but Chinpipi did not give him the chance. He grabbed his collar and shouted, "Get lost!" Cui Xiu turned pale with fright. However, he soon realized something strange. The force on his neck was not strong, but the fatty's face was red, and it was obvious that he had used all his strength. So it turned out to be a scholar without the strength to truss a chicken. Naturally, he was not from the legendary second floor. At most, he was an ordinary student of the academy. As a bigwig of the Cui family in Qinghe County, Cui Xiu was not afraid of an ordinary student of the academy. He was ashamed and angry when he thought of his previous fear. He shouted, "How dare you? How dare you commit violence? Guards!" The door of the scholar's mansion opened to welcome Chinpipi and Tang Xiaodang. Before the door was closed, the stewards and servants of the Cui family, who were waiting on the street outside the mansion, heard their masters scolding and rushed in. Chinpipi found that he could not move them and could not help but feel ashamed. He let go of his hand awkwardly and looked back at Tang Xiaodang. He said, "I don't want to lower myself to their level." Tang Xiaodang sighed and turned to the fierce stewards and servants. She rolled up her sleeves and said, "I can't do all the physical work in the future, can I?" A series of clear sounds rang out in the courtyard. The stewards and servants of the Cui family, who had rushed into the scholar's mansion, did not even realize what was happening before they were knocked to the ground and cried out in pain. The goal of the girl from the Devil's Doctrine was to become the strongest woman in the world. It did not take much effort to deal with these stewards and servants. It was clean and neat, and could even be described as refreshing. Cui Xiu's expression changed when he saw his servants with broken legs and bleeding in pain. He knew that something was wrong and was about to reveal his identity. However, he did not expect Tang Xiaodang to be more decisive than Chinpipi. She grabbed his neck and threw him out of the mansion's wall like a chick. Cui Xiu's body flew over the wall and landed on the ground. He didn't know which leg of his was broken, but he almost fainted from the pain. Then, Tang Xiaodang threw all the people who had rushed into the scholar's mansion out. However, the stewards and servants did not receive the same treatment as Cui Xiu. Instead, she kicked them out of the wall like stones. There were sounds of air being pierced, and there were screams and bangs. Chinpipi was envious when he saw Tang Xiaodang kicking people like stones. He wished he could change to the Devil's Doctrine. But he was also a little afraid of the future. He had mixed feelings. Zheng Jing and his wife looked at the scene in front of them and could not help but shake their heads and smile bitterly. They knew that their daughter and Ning Kei's son-in-law were not ordinary people, but they did not expect that this young and adorable girl would have such great strength and be so decisive. "Mr. 12, thank you for taking care of us for the past year," Zheng Jing said to Chinpipi gratefully. At this moment, Chinpipi was ashamed of his inferiority. He did not dare to accept Zheng Jing's words as he usually did. He waved his hands and said, "When Ning Kei was in the wilderness, I was responsible for taking care of Sang Sang. Now I don't know where they are playing, so I will take care of you too. But I will leave Chang'an for a while, so I brought my niece here. She will take care of everything in the mansion in the future. As you can see, she is much stronger than me, and she is very close to Sang Sang. You don't have to be so polite." Zheng Jing was a little surprised. He thought that the sublime people on the second floor of the academy rarely left the mountain, so why did Mr. 12 have to travel so far away? He asked Chinpipi a few questions, but Chinpipi just answered casually and did not want to explain in detail. The people of the Cui family from Qinghe Prefecture were kicked out of the Grand Secretary's mansion by Tang Xiaodang. Logically, they should have helped each other or left in a carriage to treat their injuries. But Tang Xiaodang's methods were not so simple. Several guards who were famous for their bravery tried several times but could not stand up. Their faces were extremely pale from the pain. The Grand Secretary's mansion was located in the noble area of the North City. The people who lived on both sides of the street were either high-ranking officials or nobles. It had always been quiet and solemn. Suddenly, There were more than a dozen injured people screaming on the street, which shocked many people. Someone sent a message to the Chong and local government, asking the local government to send someone to see what had happened. If it was an ordinary street fight, the Chong and local government would at most send a supervisor. But when he heard that it was related to the Grand Secretary's mansion, Shangwan Yangyu's triangular eyes suddenly narrowed. As the prefectural magistrate of Chong and City, he certainly knew which bigwig lived in that mansion. The Grand Secretary of the Imperial Library, even though he had resigned more than half a year ago, was not someone he could take lightly. So he had to go there himself. When he arrived at the gate of the Grand Secretary's mansion, Shangwan Yangyu suddenly felt very regretful when he found out that the injured people were from the Chui family from Qinghe Prefecture. He thought that if he had known this earlier, he would have used the excuse of being seriously ill or escaping the death of his mother. How could he be stuck between the big families of Qinghe Prefecture and the Grand Secretary, Zhang Jing? The position of prefectural magistrate of Chong and City was extremely important and difficult. Shangwan Yangyu had been able to sit in the position for so many years and had so much money in his hands. He relied on the 4 words, slippery hands, and smoothing things over. Seeing that he could not get out of this situation, he began to think about how to smooth things over today. He first sent his subordinates to help Chui Xiu into the carriage for treatment, and then prepared to enter the mansion to ask for some mercy from the Grand Secretary. Just then, Zhang Jing sent Chun Pippi and Tang shouting out of the mansion, and they met at the gate of the mansion. Shangwan Yangyu looked at the handsome fat man and suddenly felt a chill in his heart. He remembered the case of the handmaiden of the old brush pen shop harboring a fugitive 2 years ago in the Chong and local government. That year, Lord Shangwan first used illness as an excuse and then knocked himself unconscious with a stick to get out of this case. It was not until a long time later that he knew that the handmaiden of Mr. 13 of the Academy was actually the separated daughter of the Grand Secretary, Zheng Jing. And it was a fat man from the Academy who took the handmaiden away in front of Zhuge Warren and Wang Jinlu of the Imperial Center Administration and the Chong and local government. Shangwan Yangyu felt cold all over and thought that it was fortunate that he did not have time to smooth things over. He first bowed to Zheng Jing, the Grand Secretary, and then suddenly turned around and sternly scolded his subordinates. "What are you still doing? Hurry up and bring these bad people back." The Yamen runners and constables of the local government were instantly dumbfounded, thinking that when had their lord been so righteous? Even if the Grand Secretary was not someone to be trifled with, this was the Chui family of Qinghe County, and his attitude was extremely gentle before. Although they were cursing in their hearts, there was no reason not to obey the Lord's order. A Yamen runner walked forward and pulled Chui Xiu off the carriage. He took out the iron chain and was about to tie him up. Chui Xiu was shocked and speechless. He thought that the prefectural magistrate's expression was extremely gentle when he revealed his identity. Why did he suddenly change his attitude? Chun Pippi looked simple and honest, but in fact he had a crystal heart. How could he not understand Shangwan Yangyu's meaning? He nodded with satisfaction and said, "Lock these people up. They're not allowed to come out until I return to Chang'an." Tang Xiaodang glanced at him and thought that he might be gone for 2 or 3 years on this long journey. Did he want the Chong and local government to lock these people up for 2 or 3 years? Chui Xiu understood at this time that he had really met a big shot, and that the other party was very likely to be a teacher from the 2nd floor of the academy. He did not want to be taken advantage of, and said repeatedly, "It's a misunderstanding. It's a misunderstanding. I guess you don't know that I'm..." He had thought that even if the other party was from the 2nd floor of the academy, he would not humiliate the Qinghe County families that had been passed down for thousands of years if he revealed his family background in front of so many people. However, he did not expect that Chun Pippi did not even bother to listen to him. He waved his hand and said, "Youngest brother once said in the letter that there are a bunch of idiots in Qinghe County. Do I have any interest in knowing?" Chui Xiu only felt a tightness in his chest, and the pain in his foot seemed to have suddenly intensified. His face turned pale. Shangwan Yangyu stood beside Chun Pippi and stroked his 3 strands of messy beard. He said awkwardly, "The laws of the Tang Empire are ironclad and cannot be violated. How can the academy be an exception? The Chong and local government can't lock people up at will. Chun Pippi knew that he was a smart person, but he did not have time to play tricks. He said, breaking into the mansion and attempting to murder an imperial court official, you could just find any law to use. Don't tell me you don't know how to do it. Shengwan Yangyu almost pulled his beard off. He said with a bitter smile, if I filter it carefully, I might filter out more than a dozen crimes. I don't know which one to use. Chun Pippi asked, what's the severity? Shengwan Yangyu was a scoundrel, despicable, and vulgar, but he did have some ability. He said casually, attempting to murder an imperial court official. Even if he failed, he should be beheaded or banished for 3,000 miles. If he is accused of breaking into a private house, the heaviest punishment is imprisonment in the mine for 3 years. If he is accused of framing, Chun Pippi's eyes brightened when he heard 3 years in the mine. He said, this is good. Shengwan Yangyu said helplessly, but the Grand Secretary's mansion is not a private house. Grand Secretary Xingjing, who had been silent at the side, looked at Cui Xiu, who was sitting on the ground beside the carriage with a pale face. He gradually felt happy, but his face was still expressionless. He suddenly said, I have already resigned, so naturally it is a private house. Shengwan Yangyu's expression didn't change, but his heart was in turmoil. He thought to himself that the Grand Secretary was known for his simple life and gentle temperament, but he didn't expect that he would stab someone in the waist with just a few words. It was really amazing. It seemed that he was not thick-skinned enough and acted too rigidly and mechanically. If he wanted to continue to climb up, he had to learn more from these old officials. Not to mention the prefectural magistrate's knowledge of officialdom. Cui Xiu knew that the 3 people in front of the mansion had casually sentenced him with a few words. He couldn't help but turn pale. He knew that, with his identity, he would definitely not be sent to the mine, but his followers might not be able to escape this fate. 3 chapters completed. Oh yeah, I write such a chapter occasionally, and then I realize what my favorite is. I have recommended it to everyone in YY, and now I strongly recommend it again. Struggling in the New Ming Dynasty. I like this book very much. I don't know the author, so I recommend it as a friend. P.S. It's Monday. Please support me with your recommendation tickets. If you still have monthly tickets, please throw them to me. Thank you very much. I will still write 3 chapters tomorrow, and I will work hard to write. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 606. In the south of Chong, and the autumn wind was chilly and there were few travelers. The sun shone through the clouds, clear as water, without any warmth. Chun Pippi and Tang Xiaodang were saying their goodbyes in the pavilion beside the road. Ning Kei is missing or dead. Anyway, there is no one from the academy to enter the human realm. Now that the situation is tense, the academy needs to establish its power. Since the idiots from Qinghe County have come to us, there is no reason not to make use of them. Apart from you, I am the last one. I have to do something before I leave. You also know that the situation is tense now. Although the academy is not afraid, it does not want the world to be in chaos. Why do you insist on leaving at this moment? Chun Pippi looked at the girl's beautiful face and said, things between us still need to be decided by the elders in the family. I want to know my father's attitude on this matter. After knowing that Chun Pippi's father was the legendary bigwig, Tang Xiaodang felt extremely complicated. However, she had already calmed down and asked, what if your father does not agree? The Jisho Abbey's Abbey Dean's son wanted to marry a girl from the Devil's Doctrine. No matter how one looked at it, it seemed that this matter would eventually come to a tragic end. Chun Pippi said, I asked for his opinion because I respect my father as a son. Since the teacher did not object to us being together, then it does not matter whether he agrees or not. If he disagrees, I will come back. Will he imprison me? Or does he want to be beaten by the teacher again? Tang Xiaodang smiled and said, how can he laugh at his own father like this? Chun Pippi smiled and said, isn't there one in front of you? Tang Xiaodang asked again, are you going to the South Sea directly or go to the Jisho Abbey first? Chun Pippi's smile faded, and he said seriously, I will go to the Jisho Abbey first, and then find a chance to go to the West Hill Divine Palace to figure out what happened in the Lang Temple last year. Also, the West Hill Divine Palace seems to be ready to reveal Song Song's identity. If this really happens, even if Ning Ke and Sang Sang reappear in the world, they will face endless pursuit. I want to see if I can buy some time. Tang Xiaodong nodded and said, "When will you come back?" The sky suddenly darkened and a cold wind blew. Gradually, raindrops fell. Chun Pippi looked at the autumn rain outside the pavilion and said, "I will come back before the first spring rain next year." "Take care on the road," said Tang Xiaodong. Chun Pippi said, "If Ning Ke comes back, remember to inform me." "How do I inform you?" Tang Xiaodong asked. Chun Pippi said, "Just look for the Southern Gate Temple. They're the fastest to contact Haoyan Taoism." Tang Xiaodong nodded and said, "Then take care." Chun Pippi turned around and walked out of the pavilion. Just as he was about to step into the rain, he suddenly turned back. Tang Xiaodong looked at him and said with a smile, "Can this little rain make you sick?" Chun Pippi looked at her seriously and said, "The rain can't make me sick, but lovesickness can make me sick." Hearing this, Tang Xiaodong blushed and began to roll up her sleeves out of habit. Chun Pippi was startled and said, "You told me to take care of myself twice. It seems that you really wanted to leave?" Tang Xiaodong bit her lower lip and refused to speak. Chun Pippi was about to leave, but he still felt reluctant. He plucked up his courage and walked up to her and held her in his arms. With the young girl in his arms, he didn't feel very proud or intoxicated. His heart was anxious, and he was constantly paying attention to her two hands. He found that although the young girl's hands were clenched very tightly and were slightly trembling, she didn't seem to have any signs of making a move. He couldn't help but feel a little relieved, so he hugged her even tighter and then lowered his head. After an unknown amount of time, the two figures in the departure pavilion gradually separated. Chun Pippi walked into the rain heroically and waved goodbye without looking back. In the pavilion, Tang Xiaodong looked at his broad back and also waved, her cheeks still blushing. At this time, the autumn wind was blowing, but it was unknown whether her slightly messy hair and mood were disturbed by the annoying autumn wind or by that person. Some people left Chong, and naturally some people returned. Not long after Chun Pippi and Tang Xiaodong parted at the pavilion, a couple holding green paper umbrellas walked into the pavilion in the patter of autumn rain. The wife was a delicate girl with a gentle expression and a satisfied look. She looked at the majestic city of Chong, and in the rain a few miles away, and was shocked. She whispered, "It's so high." Her husband was a middle-aged man who smiled at her words. He wore a green robe and looked gentle and elegant. His gestures were free and easy. If he did not carry a little girl on his back, who knew how many girls in Chong and would be attracted to him? The little girl was about 2 years old. Her little hands tightly grasped the clothes of the middle-aged man and tried to raise her head to look at the city wall in the distance. Her eyes were black and white as if they were painted. They rolled around and looked particularly lively. The autumn rain temporarily stopped. The middle-aged man took his wife, carried his daughter on his back, and carried his simple luggage out of the farewell pavilion. They walked toward the south gate of Chong, and as he approached, his footsteps did not change, but they seemed to be much lighter. It was quiet at the south gate, but it was not that there were no people. On the contrary, there were many people at the city gate today. There were officers in armor, officials in shoe clothes, and several hundred green-skinned men in green clothes and shoes who were obviously not good people. There was even a eunuch. Looking at the gate, the middle-aged man did not stop but shook his head helplessly. His wife was born in the countryside. Although she had lived in the capital of the Great River Kingdom for 2 years and gained some knowledge, she had never seen such a big battle array. She could not help but feel a little frightened and subconsciously reached out to grab his sleeve. Looking at the family of 3 walking towards the city gate, the crowd gradually became restless. Even some of the men in black clothes had tears in their eyes. A man wearing the official uniform of the commander of the Valiant Cavalry Battalion took the lead and bowed down, followed by countless people, but their voices were not the same. "Welcome, Grand Master. Welcome, Big Brother. Second Brother Chow, Mr. Spring Breeze Pavilion. Come with me to the palace. His Majesty has been waiting for you." The family of three who returned to Chang in the autumn rain were Chow Xiaoshu of Spring Breeze Pavilion, his wife, and daughter. He had planned to return to Chang and with his family last autumn, but his daughter, Little Pumpkin, suddenly fell seriously ill and the doctor told her not to be tired. So he delayed his return to this autumn. Chow Xiaoshu did not follow Eunuch Lin to the palace. After meeting with his brothers, he directly went to the East City's Spring Breeze Pavilion horizontal 2nd Street. As the saying goes, filial piety comes first. Eunuch Lin could only sigh helplessly and feel sorry for His Majesty. The group of people entered the old house of Spring Breeze Pavilion. Old Master Chow was too lazy to talk with his unfilial son. He carried his granddaughter and went to the backyard to pick autumn fruits to eat. As for Chow Xiaoshu's wife, Linzi, she hadn't recovered from today's repeated shocks before she was invited to the backyard by several women. Looking at his brothers in the hall, Chow Xiaoshu found that they had not suffered any pain or disaster in the past few years. He could not help but feel comforted. After a long separation, they naturally drank together and the scene was very lively. However, he noticed that one person at the table seemed to be a little silent. That person was the most trusted think tank, Chin 7. Chow Xiaoshu knew that Chun Vii's silence often represented some very difficult things, but he did not intend to discuss those things tonight, or even that thing at all. He quietly looked at the wine cup in his hand and suddenly asked, "Is the old brush pen shop still there?" As soon as this question came out, the table suddenly became very quiet. Chong San and others looked at Chin 7, but Mr. Chi shook his head as if he had a different view on some things. Chun 7 knew that the question was directed at him, so he gently turned the wine cup and said, "The rental contracts of all the houses on Lin 47th Street have arrived. It will not be too glaring if they are all taken back." Chow Xiaoshu calmly said, "I don't care about other shops, but I rented the old brush pen shop to him. If he doesn't come back, then he will continue renting it. No one can think about taking it back." Mr. Chi finally had a chance to interrupt. He said, "The dividends of the gambling house in the Western City have always been calculated, and we have saved it for Mr. 13. The house by Yinming Lake has always been looked after by our brothers." Chow Xiaoshu nodded. Chin 7 put down the wine cup in his hand, looked at Chow Xiaoshu and said, "If the rumor is true, in fact, I'm 90% sure that the rumor is true. We should take advantage of the fact that no one is paying attention to it. We don't owe Ning Ke anything, and there is no reason for everyone to be implicated because of him. Lao Chi, you have always been the one with the best brains among all of us. Whether it was the lawsuit with the Ministry of Revenue or the conflict with the military ministry, it was all thanks to your advice. His Majesty has always appreciated you. If it were not for the criminal record, perhaps you would have already entered the military ministry. Your thinking is not wrong. The words of an experienced and prudent person always make sense at any time and in any place." Chow Xiaoshu raised his wine cup and toasted Chin 7, and then slowly drank it up. Chen Chi sighed. He knew second brother Chow's temperament very well. Once he started talking like that, it was tantamount to saying that there was no turning back. He picked up the wine cup and drank it in one gulp. He felt a bit bitter. As expected, Chow Xiaoshu continued, "But Lin 47th Street is not the public property of the gang. It is my private property, so I want to maintain the status quo for the time being." Looking at his most respected brother, Chun 7 was still a little unwilling. He said anxiously, "This matter is too big. Not to mention the Fish Dragon Gang. Even the Imperial Court and the Academy can't handle it." Chow Xiaoshu put down the wine cup and calmly said, "There are some things in the world that have nothing to do with whether they can handle it or not, but whether they should handle it or not. On that rainy spring night, I invited Ning Ke to go to the Spring Breeze Pavilion with me in front of the old brush pen shop to kill people. He didn't ask me who I was, so now I don't want to know who he is. Ning Ke and Sang Sang have been missing for a whole year. No one knew where they had gone. It was as if they had disappeared into thin air. Logically speaking, the two of them should be dead, and the prefectural magistrate of Chang had already issued a death certificate. However, in fact, many people believed that they were not dead. Some people didn't believe that Ning Ke and Sang Sang were dead because their bodies were not found in the Lang Temple. Some people didn't believe it because they didn't want Ning Ke and Sang Sang to die. However, no matter which one it was, no one could find or even guess where they were now if they were not dead. Even the headmaster didn't know where Ning Ke and Sang Sang were now if they were not dead. On the precipice of the back mountain of the academy, the headmaster was enjoying chrysanthemums, eating crabs, and drinking yellow wine. Although the chrysanthemums were far away in the mountains in the south of Chong, and he could still see them clearly. If there is another world or another space in the chessboard, then Ning Ke and Sang Sang would naturally be destroyed if the chessboard was destroyed. If Qin Yin had successfully accelerated the flow of time in the chessboard, then 1 year in the human world would have been 3 lifetimes for the 2 poor guys in the chessboard. The headmaster picked up the warm wine pot and took a sip. He said, "Either way, it doesn't seem to be a good result. However, the good news is that I don't think anyone can destroy the chessboard. You know, it is something that Buddha left for the monks in the Xiankong temple to save their lives. I also don't think that Qin Yin has the ability to accelerate the flow of time in the chessboard world to the extent of turning the chessboard over. Therefore, they should still be alive and haven't been in there for a long time. We just have to see when they can come out." Jun Mo knelt beside the headmaster and was using a set of very complicated tools to cut the crab meat for the headmaster. He said, "According to what the calligraphy addict told Qi Shan, only you can open the chessboard. The problem is that we don't even know where the chessboard is." The headmaster said, "The chessboard is in the chessboard." Jun Mo immediately understood the meaning of this sentence. He slightly raised his eyebrows and said, "Isn't this a cycle of death?" The headmaster shook his head and said, "Since it is a cycle, it will naturally grow and multiply. How can it be a death? The chessboard itself will break this doom. I just don't know how long Qi Shan will stay." Jun Mo said, "The West Hill Divine Palace will announce to the world 3 days later. The edict has already been sent here. It states that Sang Sang is the daughter of Yama, and the followers of Hao Yin are to be hunted down and killed. They even released a portrait. However, the Academy and youngest brother are not mentioned in the edict." After a short pause, he continued, "Eldest brother has been looking for youngest brother and Sang Sang in the world for a whole year. I don't know if he can find them, or if he can find them before the Buddhism and Taoism sects." The headmaster looked up at the drizzling autumn sky and said, "If those Taoist priests and monks can really find Ning Ke and Sang Sang before your senior brother, then this is really God's will." At this time, Jun Mo had already peeled a lake crab. He placed it on a plate and respectfully handed it to the headmaster. The headmaster looked at the crab that looked as good as before. In fact, the crab shell and flesh had been peeled off, and even the smallest piece of flesh had been peeled off. He said, "The fun of eating crab is to do it yourself. Whether chewing or peeling, what fun is there in this situation?" In the autumn of last year, a scholar left the Lang Temple and then appeared in the field deep in the west of the wilderness. In front of him were hundreds of monks with profound dharma. Those monks looked at the gentle and dusty scholar as if they were facing a formidable enemy. A voice that could only be described as magnificent sounded in the field. The voice first chanted the name of Buddha and then indifferently asked, "Mr. First, what brings you to our Xiankong temple?" Eldest brother replied, "Greetings, chief preaching monk. I want to know if you have seen my youngest brother." In the following 3 days, the bell in the Xiankong temple rang loudly and the light of Buddha shone brightly. There seemed to be a wind blowing in the temple. The scholar found nothing and left. In the spring of this year, the scholar visited the 72 temples of the Yuelin kingdom. Every time he went to a temple, he would take out a portrait and ask the monks in the temple, "Have you seen my youngest brother and this little girl?" In the summer, the scholar visited the Taoist temple of the Song kingdom and found nothing. In autumn, the scholar returned to the Lang temple and asked the abbot of the Lang temple, Monk Guan Hai, to mobilize more than 1,000 workers to dig up a few huge rocks in the back of the temple. Then he stood in the ruins and looked at the broken well and ruins for a long time. He always felt that it was his responsibility not to know whether his youngest brother was alive or not. After a while, He came to a very shabby Taoist temple and knocked on the door politely. He took out the wrinkled portrait and looked at the old Taoist in the temple. He coughed uncomfortably and then asked in a slightly hoarse voice, "If you come from the Tile Mountain town, have you seen these two people?" The old Taoist had no idea what he was talking about and did not understand how the scholar knew that he came from the Tile Mountain town. He shook his head in confusion. There was no disappointment on the scholar's face. He calmly said goodbye to the old Taoist and turned to leave the Taoist temple. He went to the next place. From autumn to autumn, for more than 300 days a year, the eldest brother of the academy searched for the traces of Ning Ke and Sang Sang in the world. He went to 400 Buddhist temples, 2,100 Taoist temples, 47 cities, and traveled all over the mountains and seas. He was tired and haggard and covered with dust, but he never stopped. The autumn rain fell on Chang. A cat was lying on the wall of the old brush pen shop. It was wet all over and screamed at the sky. Then it jumped into the small courtyard and walked into the bedroom with familiarity. It lay down on the bed and wiped the rain off its body with a quilt. This small courtyard had been uninhabited for a long time. The hateful young man who liked to hit it with stones had died somewhere. Therefore, the cat felt that its current life was very happy. It slept sweetly on the dusty quilt. It slept on its stomach, on its back, with its tail between its legs, holding its tail, or with its 4 feet facing the sky. It changed countless positions and slept for many days. Finally, it felt a little bored. The cat bent its 2 front legs and put its head on its soft paws. It looked at the door with its head slightly tilted. It suddenly felt a little lonely and even began to expect to hear the sound of someone pushing the door open. The servants in the house by the Yinming Lake had either been dismissed or returned to the Grand Secretary's mansion. There was no light in the whole house, making it seem particularly deserted. The lotus leaves in the lake were withered and swayed slightly in the autumn rain. No one knew if any of the lotus leaves still remember the thunder and the things that happened in the past. A cold sun hung over the wasteland. The yellow grass was covered with frost. Even if 2 finger-sized small fish trapped in the pond wanted to help each other, the foam that they spat out would be frozen into ice in a very short time. Suddenly, the shallow pond became deeper. The wheels roared past. A black carriage rushed out of the air with a violent momentum and landed heavily on the slightly hard ground of the wilderness. It continued to rush forward at an amazing speed, as if it wanted to catch up with the distant sun. This chapter has 5,000 words. I don't know when I can write the next chapter. Don't wait for me. Go to bed early. I will continue to write. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 607. There are flowers in the 4 seasons of the world. Even in winter, there are plum blossoms. Naturally, there are also flowers in autumn. The Lang Temple was most famous for its osmanthus flowers in autumn. Ning Ke held Sang Sang, who was covered in blood. For some reason, he thought of the osmanthus flowers beside the lone grave in the pagoda forest before he died. At this moment, the sword that came from the sky was very close to the black horse carriage. It would probably stab Sang Sang and him in the next moment. In fact, he did not really see the flying sword, but he sensed it and was sure that it was from the Sage of Sword, Liu Bai. He knew that he and Sang Sang were about to die, so he did not do anything else. He only hugged Sang Sang tighter and waited quietly. However, what happened next was completely beyond Ning Ke's imagination and calculation. The sword that came from the sky and was supposed to kill the 2 of them actually flew past the black horse carriage. The quiet light of Buddha faded behind the horse carriage. The dilapidated scene in the back temple of the Lang Temple and the autumn rain were all isolated outside and then disappeared without a trace. It was quiet all around. Ning Ke knew that the horse carriage had completely entered the world in the chessboard. His extremely tense mind suddenly relaxed. Sweat poured out like a storm and instantly drenched his body. The big black horse also felt the changes in the surrounding environment. It neighed happily and galloped on the quiet road. However, before it could run more than 10 feet, the seemingly deep and endless road suddenly broke in the middle. The road was originally on a high mountain in the chessboard world. The sudden collapse in front of it naturally turned it into a cliff. Having just escaped from a desperate situation, it did not expect to face such danger in such a short time. The big black horse did not even have time to stop. Its violent temper flared up in the moment of despair, and it actually rushed down while neighing wildly. With a heavy crash, the black horse carriage landed heavily on the ground. The wheels crushed a puddle that was about to freeze. Then it rolled over the slightly hardened and cold ground and continued galloping towards the cold sun in the distance. The violent impact bounced Ning K up in the carriage. His head hit the carriage board heavily, and the pain made him wake up from the confusion caused by the unexpected change. He subconsciously looked out of the window, only to see a stretch of desolation. The field was dark and silent, and there were a few withered trees occasionally. This was not the Lang Temple, but it was also not the world in the chessboard. The white grass with the color of frost had long died, and the fish in the puddles must have long been frozen. It was still autumn. The scenery looked familiar to him, but he had never been here before. What was this place? Was this a wasteland? But a moment ago, the black horse carriage was still in front of the back temple of Lang Temple. Why did it appear in the wilderness the next moment? The Lang Temple was located in the southeast territorial sea. The closest distance to the wilderness was more than 1,000 miles. What had happened? Why were we here? Ning K looked at the scenery of the wilderness outside the window and was shocked speechless. Then he came to his senses and anxiously looked at Sang Sang in his arms. Although the little girl was still very weak, her life should not be in danger. He could not help but gasp heavily and wave his fist forcefully. As long as Sang Sang was still alive, as long as this was not the Lang Temple, as long as there was no light of Buddha shrouding the horse carriage, he would not care even if they were in the underworld, let alone traversing thousands of miles to the wilderness. After galloping for a distance, the big black horse woke up from the violent emotions that had erupted before its death. It slowly stopped and turned its head to look around in alarm. After confirming that this was not the Lang Temple and that it had not fallen to its death under the damned cliff, it began to pant with lingering fear. Sang Sang woke up and struggled to open her eyes. Looking at the sky outside the window, she found that she was not dead, and neither was Ning Quebec. She could not help but feel a little confused and asked, "Where is this?" Ning K held her close to the window and looked out. After thinking silently for a moment, he remembered an illusion that Master Chishan had told him a few days ago and vaguely guessed the truth. However, even though he had seen it with his own eyes, he still found it hard to believe what he had encountered. "If I'm not wrong, we should be in the western wilderness now," he said. Hearing his answer, Song Song's nose turned sour. She said sadly, "The western wilderness and the Tile Mountain have to cross the entire continent. It is so far away. How can we arrive in the blink of an eye? Are we already dead? Is this the underworld? We are already dead. Ning K, why do you still like to lie to me?" Ning K wiped the tears off her pale little face and coaxed, "If you are really dead, it doesn't matter if I lie to you. When did I lie to you about anything when you were not dead? This is really the western wilderness." Sang Sang felt a little better and forced herself to sit up in his arms. Looking out of the window, she found that it was really like the wilderness that she and Ning K were familiar with. She could not help but be surprised. A few days ago, Master Chishan told me a story about the Lang Temple. Ning K said thoughtfully, "It is said that when Buddha cultivated in the Tile Mountain, he once sensed that there was a place at the foot of the mountain that was vaguely connected to the Xiankong Temple. So he ordered his disciples to build the Lang Temple there. Later, Buddha comprehended the supreme dharma of space passage and built a simple stone pagoda there, which could allow monks to directly reach the far west Pure Land. I asked the master if the formation was still there. The master said that after tens of thousands of years, the mana left by the Buddha had disappeared without a trace. The stone pagoda had also turned into ashes. The monks in the temple built a Buddhist temple on the location of the stone pagoda. It was the Buddhist temple that we were sitting in before." Sang Sang could not believe this explanation. She widened her eyes and asked, Are you saying that when the master opened the world of the chessboard, he also opened the array of the stone pagoda left by Buddha? So he sent us here? Ning Ke shook his head and said, since the master thought that the space array left by Buddha had lost its effect, then he definitely did not open it. Perhaps something happened in the Lang Temple after the horse carriage entered the chessboard, but we have no way of knowing now. It must have been a big commotion. The array of the stone pagoda deep in the foundation of the Buddha Hall in the back temple of the Lang Temple had been buried for many years. The power left by Buddha had indeed almost completely disappeared. However, the monks in the temple had been chanting and worshipping Buddha for countless years. Under the influence of the Buddha's nature, the stone pagoda still retained the last bit of power. Ning Ke did not know what happened in the Lang Temple after the black horse carriage entered the chessboard. But his guess was right. The commotion that could reopen the array left by Buddha was naturally not small. At that moment, the world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect, Qin Yin, broke his 16-year silent meditation and wanted to forcefully reverse the rules of the chessboard world. Second brother, Jun Mo, threw out the iron sword with all his power. The silent meditation of the Buddhism sect and the iron sword of the academy were the most powerful techniques in the cultivation world. But if there was only one of them, it would not be enough to open the array. But when the two overlapped, a very magical change occurred. The power of Buddha hidden in the broken well was activated, and the array in the stone pagoda was reopened. Perhaps because the chessboard was also a relic of Buddha, the array automatically sent the chessboard to the western wilderness. So when the black horse carriage rushed out of the chessboard world, it naturally landed in the wilderness. There is one more thing that I do not understand. Why can we rush out of the chessboard world on our own? Ning Ke was very puzzled. Sang Sang had already believed this magical experience. Because of this, she thought of something else. Her face turned pale, and she said, if that array is connected to the Lang Temple and the Xiankong Temple, then we are now. Ning Ke looked at the Bodhi tree, with gray bark and futon leaves in the distance. He said with a serious expression, yes, we should be very close to the Xiankong Temple now. The big black horse was in the ecstasy of surviving a disaster. It kicked its front hooves lightly and pulled up the slightly black soil. It wanted to see if it could find some good things like the yellow fruit of the goblin to reward itself. Suddenly, it heard the sound coming from the carriage. Its ears suddenly stood up in fear, and its body became extremely stiff. Because of the previous encounter in the Lang Temple, it had a deep impression of the monk in the cotton kasaya. It should be said that it was extremely afraid of him, and that monk was from the Xiankong Temple. In its view, any monk from the Xiankong Temple was so terrifying. Now that he had come to the Xiankong Temple, it was no different from courting death. The big black horse forcibly suppressed the fear in its heart and did not dare to neigh. It stealthily turned around and prepared to escape in the direction from which it came. However, when it turned around, it was shocked to find that the scenery in all four directions was almost the same. It did not know where the Xiankong Temple was. Where should it escape to? Ning Ke carefully placed Sang Sang on the bedding and walked out of the carriage. He stood on the shaft of the carriage and covered his eyes with his hand. He looked up at the sky seriously for a long time and did not say anything. The big black horse was extremely anxious. It thought, how can you still be in a mood to look up at the starry sky at a time like this? Look at the cold sun. It is obviously morning. Where are the stars? Why can't I see anything? Ning Ke was a little confused. Could it be that the array does not lead to the Xiankong Temple? But there is clearly something wrong with the Bodhi tree. The big black horse's eyes brightened. It thought that Ning Ke was indeed worthy of his master. He could actually think that the Xiankong Temple must be on the mythical floating island. Then as long as he looked up at the sky, he would not have to worry, would he? Ning Ke saw a very small mound in the distance. He could vaguely see some green on it. He gently kicked the big black horse's rump and motioned it to go there and see what was there. The big black horse twisted its rump angrily. It was not that it was dissatisfied with being kicked by Ning Quebec. It was something that it had long been used to, but it felt that Ning Ke's decision was a little hasty. In a place like the wilderness, as long as there was green, there must be danger. It was said that Ning Ke had killed the horse gang in the wilderness. Didn't he know that? Ning Ke knew what the silly horse was thinking. He said angrily, "Do you think that the Xiankong temple is on that mound? Such a small mound cannot even put an incense burner. How about you make a Buddhist temple out of it?" The big black horse thought that Ning Ke's words made sense. It was probably confused by fear. This guy was indeed worthy of being its master. He could still be so calm after escaping from death. The wheels rolled, and the black horse carriage moved toward the green mound in the distance. In the beginning, Ning Ke's expression was still very calm. However, gradually, his expression became more and more solemn. That was because he found something very strange. With the speed of the big black horse, the mound seemed to be very far. In fact, it should not take long to reach it. However, after a while, the mound still seemed to be far away. Ning Ke gradually became vigilant. He lifted the curtain and was ready to stop the big black horse. The big black horse had already stopped. Its eyes were full of fear and its thick lips were tightly shut. It did not dare to show even one of its big white teeth that it was proud of. It did not dare to breathe at this time. Ning Ke saw the scene in front of the horse carriage. His body suddenly stiffened, and he was so shocked that he could not breathe. The wilderness suddenly sank 100 feet in front of the black horse carriage, forming a steep cliff. Because the terrain of the wilderness was extremely flat, it could not be seen before. It was only when they walked in front of the cliff that they discovered it. It was indeed very strange that a cliff suddenly appeared in the wilderness. However, it was not the cliff itself that shocked Ning Ke and the big black horse so much that they did not dare to breathe. The cliff was extremely wide and spread out in all directions in front of the wilderness. There seemed to be no end in sight. Then, it merged in the distant sky and formed an incomparably wide and deep sinkhole. It was so big that humans could not even imagine it. Looking at the shocking scene in front of him, Ning Ke even had a very strong feeling that even if the entire Chong and city was placed in it, it would not be able to fill up the sinkhole. He had once been to the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine and was shocked by the magnificent building that the desolate man had dug between heaven and earth 1,000 years ago. However, compared to this sinkhole, the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine was like an inconspicuous hut. Right in the middle of the sinkhole stood an extremely majestic mountain. This mountain seemed to be as high as the highest peak of Min Mountain. However, because the sinkhole was too deep, only a very small part of the mountain was poking out of the ground. The majestic mountain in the sinkhole was at least dozens of miles away from the black horse carriage by the side of the sinkhole. The peak that poked out of the ground was lush and lush. It was the little green mound that Ning Ke had seen earlier. If someone could look down at the ground of the western wilderness from tens of thousands of miles up in the sky, in his eyes, the sinkhole and the mountain in the sinkhole would probably be like an exquisitely designed bonsai. However, when such a magnificent bonsai appeared in the human world, it would definitely shock anyone who saw it for the first time. Ning Ke and the big black horse were very shocked, but they were not in the mood to admire it. Because there were countless yellow temples faintly visible on the majestic mountain in the sinkhole. Those temples in the mountain were probably the Xiankong Temple. It could only be the Xiankong Temple. Of course, Chao Xiaoshu's wife should be a young married woman. I used 5 strokes, and the word wife and woman are only a few fingers apart. That's why I typed the previous chapter wrongly. It was a mistake, but I didn't really forget. I'd like to report and apologize to everyone. But recently, there have been so many typos. The leader who once said that he would help me fix it seems to have long forgotten about it. If I really want to apologize, I'd really have to apologize countless times. Suppressing the strong urge to write a single chapter for votes, I strongly urge you to vote for the monthly votes in your hands. I'll keep muttering to myself. I'll definitely trouble you to vote for me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 608. A moment later, the man and the horse woke up from the shock. The big black horse could not resist the instinctive fear and turned around to escape, while Ning Ke was still staring at the scene under the cliff in a daze. Xiankong Temple was an unknown place. Even cultivators only vaguely knew that this sacred place of Buddhism was located in the depths of the western wilderness and was rarely visited. Because of the name of Xiankong Temple, many people naturally guessed that Xiankong Temple must be built on the legendary floating island that only those in the divine state could have. Who would have thought that Xiankong Temple was not floating in the sky, but under the ground? Ninkei looked at the mountain in the distance where the big black horse's body was hidden under the ground and felt puzzled. At this moment, on the cliff far away in the southwest, countless white fog suddenly fell. The fog was slightly moist and heavier than the air. It slowly fell from the edge of the cliff to the bottom of the giant sinkhole, looking like a white waterfall. The giant sinkhole was originally humid and foggy. At this time, the morning fog that gathered on the surface suddenly became a vast expanse of whiteness. The majestic mountain peak was shrouded in clouds and fog. It was impossible to see the bottom of the mountain, as if it had disappeared. Looking from the black carriage, it seemed to have become a floating island floating in the clouds. The yellow temple between the peaks of the island was faintly discernible in the fog, as if it was a Buddhist paradise. Ninkei looked at the amazing scene in front of him and said with emotion, "So this is the origin of Xiankong Temple." The big black horse lowered its head and lightly kicked the ground, not daring to make a sound. However, it was extremely anxious and nervous. It thought that even if the sacred place of Buddhism was indescribably magical, it was not worth taking such a big risk. Ninkei did not think it was very risky. With his eyesight, he could only see the rough shape of the yellow temple in the distant mountain in the giant sinkhole. Then from the mountain to the ground, the black horse carriage was about the size of a black grain of sand and would not attract the attention of the monks in Xiankong Temple. He walked back to the carriage and took out something that looked like an iron cylinder from his luggage. He stretched it slightly and put it to his right, eyed a look at the mountain in the distance. The iron cylinder was a stargazing mirror that he designed, and then carefully made by fourth brother and sixth brother. There were two of them. One was given to the headmaster, and the other was naturally carried by him. When the headmaster of the academy first used this mirror to observe the stars, he changed it to a telescope based on its effect. Ninkei did not know about this, but he knew that this mirror was originally used to see far. The clouds and mist in the giant sinkhole flowed very fast. The yellow temple and the mountain peak appeared and disappeared from time to time. Sometimes the world below the mountainside could be seen. Ninkei held the telescope and looked at the magnified scenery in the circular field of view. He looked at the monks who were doing their morning exercises on the stone ground in front of the temple and remained silent. There was probably wind whistling up from the bottom of the giant sinkhole, and the thick clouds on the mountainside were mostly blown away. Ninkei looked at the scene at the mountainside through the telescope and was surprised to find that there were layers of terraced fields below the mountainside of the giant peak. Looking at the color of the plants in the fields, it should be the cold rice that was hard to grow in the wilderness. Then he found that there was a river at the bottom of the giant sinkhole and farmhouses. Ninkei silently observed the Xiankong Temple with the telescope. His expression became more and more serious, and his hands holding the iron cylinder became more and more stiff. According to the scene he saw, he estimated that there were about 1,000 monks in the Xiankong Temple, and at least 100,000 people lived in the vast field at the bottom of the giant sinkhole. Those dark-skinned and ragged farmers were responsible for providing daily necessities for the Xiankong Temple and must bear a lot of heavy labor. Xiankong Temple had existed for many years, and those mortals must have lived at the bottom of the giant sinkhole for many years. Many generations of mortals had lived in the damp and dark underground, working hard without complaint to maintain the existence of Xiankong Temple. Ninkei believed that even the most devout Buddhist believer could not bear such torture forever. The monks in Xiankong Temple must have their own ways to drive these farmers like animals. In this sense, those farmers were more like serfs that had long been abolished in the Central Plains. In a very short time, many scenes appeared in Ninkei's mind. The escaped slaves who had their shoulder blades pierced by iron chains, the disrespectful people who fell dead in the cold rice fields, the hundreds of thousands of poor mortals kneeling in front of the mountain peak, and the extravagant life of the monks in the temple. He put down the telescope and looked at the Xiankong temple in the clouds, which looked like a Buddhist country. He frowned slightly. Sang Sang lifted the curtain and saw the scene in front of her. She was shocked speechless. Ning Ke handed the telescope to her and said, "Take a look and then leave. Our trip to the Xiankong temple is not in vain." If Ning Ke was a man of great wisdom and courage, he might climb down the cliff and secretly go to the miserable world under the clouds. He might start a rebellion among the serfs and overthrow the deformed Xiankong temple. Or he might sneak into the Xiankong temple to find the treasures that Buddhism had accumulated for many years. But he was not such a person. After observing the Xiankong temple, he did not hesitate at all. He let the big black horse take the carriage away from the edge of the giant sinkhole and left quietly in the opposite direction. Although the treasures were good, it depended on whether he was alive to get them. Everyone was curious. If he was still the simple Mr. 13 of the academy before he entered the Lang Temple, he would go to the Xiankong temple no matter what. Anyway, even if the monks caught him, they would not dare to kill him. But now he had Sang Sang with him. Although the world was big, there seemed to be no place to stay, not to mention the Lang Temple, where the Buddhism sect was bent on killing Sang Sang. The black carriage moved quietly. After a while, it returned to the place where they had started. It was just a little off course and happened to pass the Bodhi tree. Ning Ke looked at the Bodhi tree outside the window and said, "That should be the place where Buddha passed away." Sang Sang looked at the gray-white trunk and futon-like green tree, thinking that in such a cold autumn there should be such a lonely tree in the wilderness, which was really a bit magical. She also thought that she actually saw the place of Buddha's parinirvana recorded in the Buddhist scriptures and could not help but be very surprised. Ning Ke said with a smile, "Now your status is no less than that of Buddha. You don't need to be too afraid of him." After the light of Buddha descended on the Lang Temple from the top of Tile Mountain, the two had no chance to discuss that matter. Or it could be said that they did not want to discuss that matter. But after all, they could not stay silent forever. Sang Sang was silent for a long time and whispered, "Will I really destroy this world?" Ning Ke thought of the Xiankong temple he had seen and the cruel truth he had guessed. He said, "I don't know and I don't care. But if it is such a world, it doesn't matter if it is destroyed." He lay in bed until 8 o'clock and then struggled to get up. Continue to write the next chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 609. There was a great horror between life and death. The life and death of the world were tied to one's body. The horror was unimaginable. Sang Sang remained silent after hearing Ning Ke's words. No one knew what she was thinking. Ning Ke reached out and touched her forehead. It was a little cold, but not as serious as when she was sick. After thinking for a while, he helped her put on the fur coat and carried her out of the black horse carriage. The two stepped on the frozen ground of the wilderness and walked to the Bodhi tree. Looking around, it was barren. There were a few willows that had already withered. No one knew when the shrill cries of birds came from afar. The Bodhi tree was still green, which was very eye-catching in the wilderness. Ning Ke and Sang Sang had been studying Buddhism in the Lang Temple for many days and had entered the Zen sect. They could clearly feel that there was some Buddha nature left on the ground under the Bodhi tree. The Buddha nature was very little and gave people a sense of desolation. There were a few slight dents on the ground under the Bodhi tree. The inside was as smooth as a mirror. What was amazing was that there were no leaves or dust left on the ground. Ning Ke looked at those marks and made a rough sketch in his mind. He found that they were exactly the marks that would be made when a person laid down on the ground. The small dent at the front should be the place where the elbow was used to bear the force. Then, the relatively larger ones below were the marks left by the body on the ground. He said to Sang Sang, "It is said that Buddha closed his eyes while lying on his side when he was in nirvana. It seems that it is true." Sang Sang didn't understand why he brought her to see the Bodhi tree and the relic left by Buddha. Everyone who cultivates Buddhism in the world wants to come to this Bodhi tree to worship. We didn't think about it, but we came here. If there is a so-called lucky chance, this is our lucky chance. Ning Ke said, "Learning Buddhism is good for your body. Even if it can only cure the symptoms, you should continue. The Buddha nature left under the Bodhi tree should be helpful for your cultivation. Sang Sang leaned weakly in his arms and said, "Where are we going?" Ning Ke said, "Back to the academy, of course." Song Song's body shrank slightly and looked a little uneasy. She said, "But I am very worried." Ning Ke frowned slightly and asked, "What are you worried about?" "The academy wants to cure me, but if my illness is really a mark left by Yama, how can it be cured? I can feel that the remnant Buddha nature under this Bodhi tree is of no help to me." Sang Sang said sadly, "Have you ever thought that if the academy can't cure me in the end and the world is about to be destroyed because of me, what should we do then?" After a moment of silence, Ning Ke said, "I said I don't care." Sang Sang whispered, "But will the headmaster and senior brothers care as much as you do?" Ning Ke was silent and didn't know how to answer. He knew clearly that his teacher and his two senior brothers really wanted to cure Sang Sang. But if they couldn't, would they really watch the underworld invasion? Sang Sang looked up at him and said seriously, "Ning Ke, have you ever thought about committing suicide?" Ning Ke patted her on the back and said, "If it's one of those sad stories in the books, it might end up like this. But I've already said that this is not a story in the books. I don't like reading, I don't want to die, and I don't want you to die either." Sang Sang said sadly, "But we have no future." The underworld invasion represented the arrival of the everlasting night and the destruction of the human world. The daughter of Yama was naturally the enemy of the whole human world. Even the Academy or the Tang Empire couldn't always stand against the whole human world. This meant that no matter how big the world was, there was no place for them. After a long silence, Ning Ke said, "I've read the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane and the notes left by Buddha. I know that Buddha has seen the future of a human world. That's why he built the Xiankong temple, left the chessboard, and left the Yulan bell, in order to deal with the underworld invasion." Sang Sang didn't understand why he said these words. Ning Ke looked at her and said, "Master Chishan once said that if you try to see the future, even if it's just a glimpse, the future will change." The Buddha saw the future back then, and he had made so many preparations. So the future he saw was naturally very different from the real future. Sang Sang said, "You mean that the future is not predestined, so we don't need to worry?" Ning Ke said, "The future is actually very similar to death. If it's predestined, then it's meaningless to worry. If it can be changed, then we don't need to worry. We just need to work hard to change it." Sang Sang said, "I see. This sentence is very reasonable." Ning Ke said, "Although I can occasionally say some very reasonable words, this sentence was not said by me, but by the headmaster, so I firmly believe it." Then he looked into Song Song's eyes and said, "Maybe the whole world won't allow us to live anymore. We still have to go back to the academy, because if this is the last trust, of course we should leave it to the headmaster." A smile appeared on Song Song's pale face, and she nodded. Ning Ke smiled and said, "We may die at any time. Tomorrow may be the last day. In fact, it's not necessarily a bad thing. At least it can urge us to do many things we wanted to do before but dared not to do." Sang Sang looked at him quietly and summoned up the courage to say, "I want to have children with you." Ning Ke was stunned and then said with a bitter smile, "It takes a long time to have children. Is there anything you want to do now?" Sang Sang asked, "What do you want to do now?" Ning Ke led her to the Bodhi tree. He took out a sharp arrowhead and carved a line of small words on the tree, which was regarded as the absolute symbol of the world by the Buddhist believers. It was sacred and inviolable. In the autumn of the 16th year of Tianqi era, Ning Ke of the Academy came here with his wife, Sang Sang, the daughter of Yama. The black carriage advanced alone in the cold wasteland. Because it was surrounded by boundless wilderness, the extremely fast carriage looked like it was moving slowly on a piece of black and gray paper. Ning Ke and Sang Sang had lived in the wilderness before, so they were familiar with this kind of monotony and desolation. They knew that even in the wilderness in the north of the Central Plains, if they were unlucky, they might not see a person for 10 days or half a month, let alone in the depths of the more desolate wilderness of the West. But he didn't expect that when the carriage was about a dozen miles away from the Bodhi tree, a person appeared in the wilderness in front of them, and it was the kind of person he least wanted to meet now. It was an old monk with a dark face, tattered robes, and dust all over his body. When traveling the world, the three kinds of people one needed to be wary of were monks, Taoist priests, and women. This wilderness was not far from Xiankong Temple, so this old monk should have something to do with Xiankong Temple. Ninkei's expression turned serious, looking at the black horse carriage that slowly stopped a few hundred feet in front of him. The wrinkles on the old monk's face gradually smoothed out. The pebbles in his dark skin rustled and fell. His calm eyes revealed a compassionate expression. The old monk chanted the name of Buddha and said, "Who would have thought that the daughter of Yama and Mr. 13 of the Academy would come to Xiankong Temple? No wonder the world couldn't find you no matter how hard they searched." The voice of the old monk in the wilderness came through the green curtain in front of the black horse carriage. Ninkei listened in silence and lowered his head to do his own preparations, but his movements paused slightly. This was because he could tell from the old monk's words that the world had been searching for him and Sang Sang for a long time. But didn't he and Sang Sang just escape from Lang Temple? Why did the whole world be alarmed? The old monk slowly raised his right palm and put it in front of his chest with one hand. He thought of a possibility, and the pity in his eyes grew stronger. He sighed and said, "It seems that Senior Brother Chishan really sent you here. Where's the chessboard? If we hand over the Buddha's chessboard, will you let us go?" Ninkei looked at the green curtain in front of him. His voice was emotionless, but his face suddenly turned pale. His body began to tremble violently, and the threads of his torn black academy uniform became denser. Sang Sang knew that he was injured and was very worried, but she tightly pressed her lips together and did not say a word. She shrank into the corner of the carriage and covered herself with a quilt. The old monk sighed and said, "Mr. 13 of the Academy is indeed, as the rumors say. You are the best at fighting in the world. You know that the people of the underworld and the people of the underworld are different, but you still do not forget to disturb my mind." But he stopped abruptly at this point. The old monk's expression suddenly froze. He felt two extremely sharp and powerful talisman intense. They had silently appeared in front of him and began to cut the cold autumn wind. In the black carriage, the quilt covering Sang Sang's body had many tiny holes. Looking carefully, one could see that each of the holes was actually two very tight openings, and the cotton was peeking out from the holes. Ninkei's face was pale, and his body was trembling. His fingers slowly and laboriously moved in the air in front of him, as if there was a heavy mountain hanging on his fingertips. The Black Academy uniform on his body was cut into countless pieces by the overflowing talisman intense. The green curtain of the horse carriage was broken into 3 pieces and slowly floated down. The old monk's expression was slightly solemn. He sat cross-legged and turned his palms in front of his chest slightly. An extremely pure and distant Buddhist aura suddenly appeared and protected his body like a light shield. In the black horse carriage dozens of feet away, Ninkei retracted his fingers and knocked an arrow. His index and middle fingers dug into the hard and tight bowstring and twisted slightly. Then he released it. There was a soft puff, and a white turbulence burst out from the end of the iron arrow and disappeared instantly. A dark mark appeared on the falling green curtain. The green cloth and the mark slowly dispersed and scattered into the air like pollen, revealing an extremely round arrow hole. The green curtain was still falling, and the arrow hole on it was forming. After a moment, there was a sharp hissing sound. Ninkei's figure tore the green curtain apart and jumped off the horse carriage at lightning speed. He rushed toward the old monk, who was dozens of feet away. The 2 extremely sharp talismans in the air of the wilderness were naturally Ninkei's 2 horizontal talisman. This was his most powerful divine talisman. In the Lang Temple, even Qin Yin and Yi Su could not break it in a short period of time. However, no one knew where the old sadhu with a dark complexion came from. He could actually use the Buddhist aura to temporarily resist it. However, even so, under the terrifying cutting power of the 2 horizontal talisman, the old sadhu sat cross-legged and used his Buddhist aura to resist. His body, which was covered in dust and gravel, was equivalent to being bound to the ground by the two horizontal talisman. Under such circumstances, how could the old sadhu avoid the powerful primordial 13 arrows? The old monk knew that he could not avoid Ninkei's iron arrow. Just when he faintly sensed that the aura in the black horse carriage in the distance was a little strange, he reacted in advance. The old monk's left palm, which had been quietly resting on his knee, suddenly shone with a golden luster. It looked like it had turned into a Buddha's palm made of pure gold. The old monk crushed the autumn wind in an extremely short period of time. He raised his golden left palm and blocked in front of his chest at a seemingly slow speed. At this moment, the iron arrow had arrived. The sharp arrowhead carried an incomparably powerful force and hit the old monk's golden jade-like left palm. There was only a soft sound of impact. The old monk's golden jade-like left palm was shattered into pieces. There was no blood or flesh at the broken part. It shone with a golden luster and scattered everywhere on the wilderness like golden sand. The iron arrow did not stop there after shattering the old monk's golden palm. It flew diagonally upwards and pierced through the old monk's left shoulder. With a spray of blood and his entire shoulder, it turned into a stream of light and disappeared into the distance. The old monk was seriously injured and his face suddenly turned pale. However, he did not reveal any expression of fear. Instead, he was extremely calm. His chest and abdomen sank slightly as he inhaled all the air in front of him. Then, he opened his dry lips slightly. However, at this moment, Ninkei's figure had already arrived like lightning, following the arrow. His right foot stepped heavily on the ground, shaking up the dust and ice shards. With strength from his waist and abdomen, the padao in his hand pierced into the old monk's lower abdomen. The Great Spirit entered with the padao and suddenly exploded. There was a swooshing sound, as if a storm had suddenly broken out of the dark clouds. Under the powerful force of the padao and the Great Spirit, the old monk's body turned into countless pieces of flesh and blood, flying everywhere. After a moment, the pieces of flesh and blood fell from the sky and landed on the hard ground of the wilderness. There was a dense patter, as if the storm that fell from the dark clouds had finally reached the ground. Ninkei sheathed his padao and took out a fire talisman from his sleeve. He threw it on the ground and then rushed back to the black horse carriage. He did not even turn to look at the flesh and the gradually rising talisman fire. The black horse carriage started again and headed into the distance of the wilderness. The flames on the wasteland gradually grew. The flesh and blood of the old ascetic monk were burnt and then burned to ashes. A dozen black crows flew out of nowhere. They smelled the smell of the fire and screeched mournfully. They were very unwilling to give up. In the black horse carriage, Sang Sang asked with a pale face, "Who is it?" "I don't know. I only know that this ascetic monk is very strong. He is definitely not an ordinary monk from the Xiankong Temple. He is at least at the level of Master Bushu. Otherwise, the two horizontal talismen would have killed him." Ninkei directed the big black horse to gallop in the southeast direction. He took the towel that Sang Sang handed to him and wiped the blood on his face. After a moment of silence, he said, "If he was prepared, it would be very difficult for me to kill him." Sang Sang said, "I don't know who he is, and he is so strong." "You killed him just like that?" Ninkei carefully wiped the blood on the padao and said calmly, "Everyone in the world wants to kill us. So from now on, I will kill whoever stands in our way. There are only 2 chapters for today. That's all. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 610. The bloodstained padao was polished until it shone brightly. Because of its dark color, it was not like snow but like smooth stone. Ninkei sheathed his padao and looked out the window at the scenery of the wilderness that was rapidly passing by. With the terrifying speed of the black horse carriage, he could have escaped directly and the old ascetic monk would not have been able to stop him. However, the old monk could have alerted the Xiankong Temple, so he chose to attack. Just as he had said, the old ascetic monk was definitely not an ordinary person in the Xiankong Temple. especially the palm that glowed with golden light. It was obviously a powerful skill of Buddhism. Its true power was definitely stronger than what he had shown in the battle. However, the old monk had been practicing Buddhism in the Xiankong temple for many years. His dharma was profound and his state was exquisite, but he did not seem to have experienced a real battle. He did not expect Ning Ke to suddenly attack while they were still talking. Moreover, he had used his three most powerful skills at once. The old monk was caught off guard and died. Thinking back to the violent battle that had ended in a flash, Ning Ke felt that Yi Hong Yu was right. The cultivators in this world only knew how to cultivate and not how to fight. The wind rushed in through the small gap in the window, making a mournful whine. The big black horse dragged the carriage forward in the wilderness at a high speed, heading southeast according to the direction Ning Ke had pointed out. Looking at the wilderness outside the window, Ning Ke silently calculated the distance and the results of his previous calculations. He knocked on the hard carriage board and signaled for the big black horse to stop. Then, he jumped off the carriage and walked into the depths of the wilderness. After some time, he walked back with a black iron arrow in his hand. The arrowhead was still stained with dry blood. It was the iron arrow that had injured the old ascetic monk. In the Lang Temple, he had used up a few of the 13 iron arrows in his quiver. Now that he was in the depths of the wilderness, he could face fatal danger at any time. Every iron arrow was extremely important to him. Hidden in the huge sinkhole under the ground, clouds and mist still lingered. The yellow temples between the giant peaks were faintly discernible. It was so quiet and peaceful. Suddenly, an indifferent and distant Buddhist name was heard from one of the temples. After a while, dozens of ascetic monks in crimson robes climbed to the ground along the steep stone path between the cliffs. Their faces were expressionless, and they looked like stones. The leading monk wore a different robe. He was the president of the Hall of Respect of Xiankong Temple, Chi Mei. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the desolate wilderness in front of him, frowning slightly. The chanting of Buddha in Xiankong Temple came from the chief monk of Scripture, who had the highest status in Xiankong Temple. The chief monk of Scripture was slightly disturbed and ordered the soldier monks of the Hall of Venerable Ones to search the depths of the wilderness. Even though Chi Mei was the chief monk of the Hall of Venerable Ones, he had to show up in person, and he knew why the chief monk of Scripture was disturbed. The chief preaching monk of the Xiankong Temple had been sentenced by the Commandment Hall to cultivate in the wilderness 3 years ago because he had violated the Buddhist precepts and was burdened by his worthless, illegitimate son. Today, the chief preaching monk should have returned to the Xiankong Temple. However, no one had seen the chief preaching monk. Chi Mei led the ascetic monk soldiers and followed the senses of the chief preaching monk into the depths of the wilderness. They walked until the evening. When the twilight was as red as blood, they finally saw the pile of ashes. The wind in the wilderness was strong, but the ashes were not completely extinguished because there were a few pieces of bone that could not be completely incinerated by any kind of fire. Looking at the colorful bones in his hand, Chi Mei was silent. The ascetic monk soldiers in red robes looked sorrowful. They sat cross-legged around the ashes and began to chant the reincarnation scripture with respect and sincerity. Chi Mei handed the bones to a monk for safekeeping with a solemn expression. Then, he knelt in front of the ashes and reached into the ashes. He began to search silently and quietly. His fingers, which were like stone branches, moved slowly in the ashes of the chief, preaching monk like a sieve, and did not miss any place. The remains of the preaching monk were burned through by the talisman fire. Other than a few bone particles, the rest had turned into fine white ash. Chi Mei should not have found anything, but as his fingers moved, his expression became more and more serious. This was because his fingertips could feel a majestic, great spirit in the ash. Chi Mei stood up and suddenly walked back the way he came. Only then did he remember that when he passed by the Bodhi tree, he felt that the tree seemed to be a little different from the one he had seen every day for decades. He walked to the Bodhi tree and looked at the line of small words engraved on the gray bark. His expression became colder and colder, and the angry Wisdom King's flame in his eyes became brighter. In the 16th year of the Tianqi era, Ning Ke of the Academy came here with his wife, daughter of Yama. Why was it 16 years? Chime was slightly puzzled. He brushed the ground with his monk's sleeves. The gravel on the surface of the wilderness rolled, and a very shallow rut appeared. He followed the rut for dozens of feet, and then the faint traces of the rut completely disappeared on the ground of the wilderness. He looked up into the distance and guessed where the black horse carriage was heading. The night was approaching. The world and the giant sinkhole had already entered a long night in advance. The last sunset could still be seen in the yellow temple at the highest point between the giant peaks. A distant bell rang from the temple and gradually spread to the bottom of the mountain. Countless yellow temples rang the bell at the same time. The bell of the Xiankong temple left the quiet underground world and came to the desolate ground. Then it spread in all directions. It would not take many days for the whole world to know that the daughter of Yama was still alive and that she was fleeing in the western wilderness with Ning Ke of the Academy. In the depths of the wilderness, a black horse carriage stopped beside a well that had been abandoned for thousands of years. A moment later, Ning Ke came out from the depths of the well with a full water bag in his hand. No one knew how he managed to find water in the well that had been abandoned for many years. The night was always cold. In order to avoid exposing himself, Ning Ke did not make a bonfire. Instead, he put a few pieces of fire talismans in the copper basin in the carriage to keep warm. This method was too extravagant. Even if he had abundant psyche power, he still had to calculate the consumption of talismans to ensure that he and Sang Sang could walk out of the wilderness. Ning Ke simply ate some dry food with cold water and began to cook porridge for Sang Sang. While waiting for the water to boil, he used the time to sort out his equipment. Since the road ahead was difficult, equipment was naturally the most important thing. He was the most hardworking person. These years, he had stored a lot of talismans. However, at the beginning, his state was relatively low, so the talismans he wrote could not be used in the battle of his current state. There were only about 20 pieces of talismans that could be used in battle, and there were not many iron arrows left in the arrow box. The next chapter will come later. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 611. While cleaning, Ning Ke saw the chessboard. After a short pause, he threw it into the corner and picked up the big black umbrella. He couldn't help but shake his head. Compared with its appearance in the past 10 years, the big black umbrella had changed a lot. The layer of greasy dirt on the umbrella's surface had completely disappeared, revealing a very thin and almost transparent pure black cloth. There were even a few holes on the edges, which looked very miserable. The big black umbrella that used to be indestructible and could withstand all attacks in the world had become like this. One could imagine how terrifying the power of the light of Buddha in the Lang Temple was. Ning Ke continued with his work. He sorted out the iron arrows, paper talismans, and spare replacement arrowheads and placed them in a convenient place. Then, he lifted up the bottom of the carriage and counted the dry food hidden inside, the strange stones needed to activate the talisman array of the carriage, as well as the yellow fruit eaten by the big black horse. According to the current amount, it should be enough to return to the academy from the wilderness. Even if the dry food was not enough, he would not worry about not being able to find food in the wilderness. It was not difficult for him to find water. If there was no other way, he could just use his psyche power to write a few more water talismans. The paper talismans in the copper basin had long disappeared and turned into warm yellow flames. This was a fire talisman that Ning Ke had written a long time ago. It looked powerful, but in fact the temperature of the flame and the length of time it could be maintained were very ordinary. The water in the small pot on the copper basin had just boiled. The rice was rolling up and down in the water. It was hard to tell how long it would take for the rice to be cooked. Ning Ke took a piece of ginseng and walked down from the carriage. He called back the big black horse that was on guard thousands of feet away. He touched its mane and thought of the scene of them going through life and death together in the Lang Temple. He was touched and said, "From now on, as long as I have a mouthful of meat, you will have a mouthful of soup." After saying this, he stuffed the ginseng into the big black horse's mouth and patted its head. The big black horse chewed and swallowed the ginseng. It raised its head unwillingly and looked at Ning K pitifully, smacking its lips. Its meaning was very clear. Master, although you have always been shameless, only willing to give me soup to drink when there is meat to eat, but now you are letting me eat such a thin piece of ginseng. How can I be full? You should know that I was scared out of my wits by that strange sinkhole and that scary temple. I carried you for more than 300 miles. Don't you understand the principle of not starving? Ning K felt a little ashamed and said, I'll definitely get you some meat tomorrow. That's all for today. The big black horse shook its head gently. It was a little angry, but more helpless. The porridge in the pot was ready and emitted a faint fragrance. Ning K helped Sang Sang sit up and fed her. He said, There's some medicine in the porridge. I stole it from that fool. Don't let it know. Sang Sang was a little embarrassed as she looked out of the carriage. She suppressed her laughter and lowered her head to eat the porridge. After eating half a bowl, she felt a little better. Thinking of his injury, she said, You eat some too. Ning K said, I have already eaten. Sang Sang said, It's cold water and dry food. How can it taste good? Ning K said, Life is better after we arrived at the city of Wei. When we were in Min Mountain, it was a good life to have dry food. Don't worry that I can't get used to it. Sang Sang thought that it was easy to go from frugality to extravagance, but it was difficult to go from extravagance to frugality. The dry food he ate now was definitely not as good as it was when he was young. However, she knew Ning K's character and did not try to persuade him. She just silently told herself to get better quickly. The porridge in the pot was still boiling, making popping sounds. Steam rose, and the carriage was very warm. Only the big black umbrella in the corner and the chessboard seemed to be emitting a chill. The seemingly ordinary chessboard was naturally the chessboard left by Buddha. Ning K could not understand why the chessboard appeared in the carriage when it should have been in the chessboard. We now know that we are deep in the western wilderness, and the location has been confirmed. However, we do not know how many days have passed since the incident in Lang Temple. He said, The old monk said that the world has been searching for us for a long time. It seems that the chessboard has played its role. We only ran on the mountain path for a moment, but a long time might have passed in the real world outside. Although it is still late autumn, I think it is at least 10 days later. Sang Sang felt that his deduction was very reasonable. She thought of the light of Buddha in Lang Temple and felt a lingering fear. She also thought of the movements in the ruined temple before entering the chessboard. She said, You guessed that it was Mr. First and Mr. Second who broke into the temple that day. What happened to them after that? I wonder if anything happened to them. Ning K said, Don't worry. There are at most 2 people in the world who can deal with my 2 senior brothers at the same time. However, they're afraid of angering the teacher, so they definitely do not dare to do anything. The 2 people he was talking about were naturally the Abbey Dean of Jishou Abbey and the chief preaching monk of Xiankong Temple. I'm more worried about Master Qishan. Ning K thought of the virtuous and benevolent high monk of the Buddhism sect. He thought of the scene when the master opened the chessboard and sent them away. He frowned and said, The master's health is not good. He used a mantra to help me fight with Qin Yin and then forcefully reversed the chessboard. I really don't know if he can withstand it. Sang Sang was also very worried when she heard that. She took out a black chess piece from her waist and looked at it blankly. Ning K knew that this was the black chess piece that Sang Sang had placed on the chessboard in the last game of the 3 games of chess on Tile Mountain. He said in a low voice, I have a bad feeling. Keep this chess piece as a souvenir. Sang Sang nodded and clenched her fist tightly to hold the black chess piece. She looked at the chessboard and said, There is no aura of Buddha on the chessboard. Is it destroyed? Ning K said, After all, it is a relic of Buddha. Even if it cannot open the world in the chessboard, it is good to keep it and sell it. It is not good to just find a place to bury it. As the night deepened, the big black horse had already fallen asleep. It was coarse and thick, so it did not care about the howling cold wind in the wilderness at night. Its sleeping style was also very different from that of ordinary horses. It did not completely support its body weight with its 4 hooves, nor did it lie on the ground like those weak old horses. Instead, it leaned against the carriage with its head tilted like a drunkard. Its nostrils were slightly puffed up, and it smelled the fragrance of porridge coming from the window. It slept very soundly. The carriage was filled with the hot mist of porridge and the talisman paper that was still slowly releasing heat in the copper basin. It was a bit stuffy and suffocating. Ninkei reached out and opened a gap on the roof of the carriage. Silver starlight came in through the gap and sprinkled on him and sang. It fell on the surface of everything and became the world of silver that they both loved the most. Sang curled up his arms and grabbed his clothes with her right hand. She looked at the night sky through the gap and found that the starry night in the wilderness was as bright as before. However, she always felt that someone was looking at her among the stars. She could not help but feel a little confused and scared, and held on to Ninkei's clothes even tighter. Ninkei did not know what she was thinking at this time. He lowered his head and kissed her forehead. He found that her forehead was a little cold, but it was much better than when she was sick. He looked up at the stars in the night sky and suddenly felt something. He reached out and pointed at the starry sky through the gap. He moved his fingertips slowly and looked extremely solemn. Sang looked at the trace of movement of his fingertips and confirmed that it was not the two horizontal talisman. She asked nervously, "A new talisman?" Ninkei said proudly, "It is not a talisman. It is just a very desolate calligraphy section with a few words. It can at least be ranked in the top 10 of my works. How much do you think it is worth?" It was all silver in the carriage. However, those were all illusory. A calligraphy section written by fingers in the air, no matter how desolate the world was also illusory. It was worthless if it could not be preserved. Sang shook her head with some regret and said, "If we really want to go back to the academy, we don't know how many dangers there will be on the way. We can't sell these words. It is better to comprehend a few new talismans as soon as possible. Although I have entered the knowing destiny state, my master has already gone to the divine kingdom with your bastard master. Without anyone to guide me, I can at most be regarded as a half-divine talisman master. I can already be regarded as a talisman Taoism genius if I can write an infinitive talisman. It is not so easy to comprehend a second talisman." Ninkei thought of what Sang had said before and remembered a very important thing. He looked at her and said, "No matter what danger we encounter on the way, you are not allowed to use divine skills, let alone open the big black umbrella." Sang understood what he meant and nodded gently. If she used the West Hill divine skills, it was very likely that she would have a relapse, die, or attract the attention of Yama. If she opened the big black umbrella, it was very likely to cause some other changes. It was also very likely to attract the attention of Yama or the powerful people of the Buddhism and Taoism sects. Either situation was extremely dangerous. In the early morning, when Sang was still asleep, Ninkei had already woken up. He looked at the sky and wind direction and confirmed that it was a good day for them to travel. Then he woke up the big black horse with his fist and urged it to hurry on. However, the black horse carriage did not go far before it met the enemy. They were in the depths of the wilderness, where there were few people. It was difficult to even meet a person, let alone an enemy. The only explanation for this situation was that Hao Hian had probably discovered the existence of the daughter of Yama. The invisible but ever-running way of heaven had begun to try to destroy her. This was a slightly undulating meadow. The yellow grass on the meadow had long been blown down by the cold wind. Maybe it was dead, or maybe it was waiting to be reborn next spring. Dozens of grassland cavalrymen in leather armor were silently waiting above the meadow. From time to time, they stretched out their hands to comfort the tired war horses under them. It seemed that they had also experienced a long journey to come here. Ninkei glanced at the grassland cavalrymen. Without observing the details of their armors, he could guess where they came from. In the western wilderness, only the tribes of the Right King's palace could have such elite cavalrymen. At this moment, the black horse carriage was about 2,000 feet away from the grassland cavalrymen of the Right King's palace. It was still out of the shooting range of the arrows. He could totally let the big black horse take advantage of its speed and charge diagonally. He believed that no matter how good the cavalrymen's riding skills were, they would not be able to catch up with him. However, The grassland cavalrymen were scattered on the meadow, and the charging line was very long. It seemed sparse and weak, but in fact, it was to prevent the black horse carriage from escaping. If Ning Ke wanted to leave without fighting, he would have to make a big detour to bypass the meadow. However, that would take too much time. The most important problem was that Ning Ke had been dealing with a horse gang and grassland cavalrymen in the wilderness for many years. He was very sure that there would be endless cavalrymen coming to intercept him. If he were to turn around and escape when he met someone who wanted to intercept him, with the other party's riding skills and hunting skills, they would only need to repeat a few times to surround the black horse carriage in the depths of the wilderness. That would be very dangerous. Therefore, Ning Ke did not avoid them. The black horse carriage continued to move slowly towards the meadow, and it was getting faster and faster. The steel wheels rolled over the grass that was covered with thin frost, splashing up a lot of mud. A cavalry leader on the meadow noticed that the black horse carriage was actually rushing towards him. His face did not show any joy or look like he was looking an idiot. Instead, it became unusually serious. Then, he slowly pulled out the saber at his waist. Whether it was the left king's palace, the right king's palace, or the golden palace, the grassland cavalrymen and the horse gang all used curved sabers. A few years ago, when Ning Ke was a professional woodcutter in the city of Wei, he was also very used to this kind of curved saber, because this kind of saber was very effective in cutting people's heads. Dozens of grassland cavalrymen pulled out the curved sabers from their sheaths at the same time, and the sound of metal clanging could be heard. When the black horse carriage reached the bottom of the meadow at a high speed and should not be able to change its direction anymore, another dozen cavalrymen silently appeared behind the leader. They took out their bows and aimed at the horse carriage. To Ning Ke, there was nothing new in the wilderness. He was even more familiar with the tactics of the grassland cavalrymen and the horse gang than he was with the military discipline of the Tang Empire. Therefore, when he saw the archers who were previously hiding under the meadow, he was not surprised or shocked. Instead, he felt that it was a little boring because he was too familiar with it. The bowstrings buzzed, and the arrows pierced through the air. More than 10 arrows drew an arc in the air and shot towards the black horse carriage from the meadow that was dozens of feet away. How can a dozen boxwood bows be used as a projectile? The horse carriage may be a big target, but it's not like that. Ning Ke looked behind him. Sang Sang was still sleeping soundly, her two small hands tightly gripping the corner of the blanket. Her eyebrows were tightly furrowed, and he did not know what she saw in her dream. He flew out of the carriage and landed on the back of the big black horse, his legs lightly squeezing the horse's belly. The big black horse neighed joyfully and dashed forward. Just a moment ago, Ning Ke had already untied the connection between the shaft and the body of the carriage. The big black horse charged forward and immediately separated from the carriage. The carriage that had lost its power continued to move forward under the influence of inertia, but at a slower speed. In the process of gradually slowing down, there was a series of soft popping sounds in the black carriage. The skylight on the ceiling, the windows on both sides, and the front door were all locked by springs. The arrows thrown by the grassland cavalrymen finally fell, whistling mournfully. 5 or 6 arrows accurately hit the carriage that was slowly coming to a stop. However, for the carriage that was made of pure steel, being hit by these seemingly terrifying arrows was not even as good as tickling. The arrows hit the carriage and broke in the middle, falling to the ground. They looked like a few dry straws trying to pierce through a stone. It was very funny and very pitiful. The black carriage was very thick. Once it was completely sealed, it was difficult to hear outside sounds. The arrows that hit the carriage made a few light sounds, like birds pecking at their food. In the carriage, Sang Sang was still sleeping soundly. She probably heard the sound of the arrows falling and waved her arms unhappily, as if trying to drive the sound away from her ears. Then she turned over and continued to sleep. Correction of a key mistake. I made a mistake in writing starlight as moonlight. At the end of the original chapter, I said that from the next day onwards, I would adjust my biological clock and try to write during the day and update during the day. End of report. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 6:12. Some of the arrows fell on the carriage and turned into broken straws, while others fell on the big black horse. However, once the big black horse sped up, it was not affected by the slope of the meadow at all. In an instant, it turned into a cloud of black smoke and dust, leaving the arrows far behind. The cavalrymen on the meadow who were about to charge were shocked speechless when they saw this scene. Their leader shouted, and the cavalrymen came to their senses. They shouted loudly and brandished their sharp machetes, dashing downwards. However, they had only dashed 100 feet when they suddenly spread out. Some of them charged towards the cloud of dust created by the big black horse, while the rest charged towards the black carriage that had stopped. It had to be said that the cavalry leader's command in such a short period of time was very correct. The carriage stopped at the bottom of the meadow and could not be moved. It was completely a target waiting to be slaughtered. If Ning Ke did not care, the grassland cavalry could kill the people in the carriage in the shortest time possible. If Ning Ke was worried about the lives of the people in the carriage, he would stop charging and turn back. Then he would lose his greatest advantage in speed and be caught in a chaotic battle. In the chaotic battle of the wilderness, roaming and shooting were the grassland cavalry's best fighting methods. However, to the cavalry leader's surprise, Ning Ke did not turn back to rescue Sang Sang in the carriage. He did not even hesitate and continued to charge above the meadow. The big black horse dragged a black shadow on the frosty white meadow at an extremely terrifying speed. The cavalry leader suddenly felt a little flustered. He shouted orders for a dozen of his subordinates to stop the enemy at all costs. In his opinion, even if they could not kill the person on the black horse, as long as they could hold him back for a short period of time, his subordinates who were charging towards the carriage would be able to complete the difficult task today. Ning Ke looked at the dozens of grassland cavalry approaching and felt the cold wind blowing away the warmth on his cheeks. He became calmer and calmer. He reached out his right hand and held the hilt of a knife that stuck out from his shoulder. Both sides were charging at high speed, and the encounter was extremely fast. The grassland cavalry at the front waved his machete, his face twisted and ferocious. He roared and slashed at Ning Quebec. With a crisp sound, the grassland cavalry's head was separated from his body. The warhorse carried the headless body and continued to gallop forward at high speed. The blood spurting from the cavalry's neck seemed to dye the sky red. The headless cavalry brushed past the big black horse and continued galloping for several feet before the corpse fell to the ground. At this time, the head that had flown in the air also fell, landing right beside the dead cavalry's hand. The previous clear and crisp sound was actually the combination of two sounds. The first sound was the grinding sound of the padao being unsheathed, and the second sound was the grinding sound of the padao cutting through the hard neck of the cavalryman. However, these two sounds eventually merged into one and became a single sound. One could imagine how fast Ning Ke's actions of unsheathing his padao to behead the cavalryman were, as if there was no interruption in between. The big black horse charged into the charging formation formed by the dozens of grassland cavalry, like black lightning. The padao in Ning Ke's hand was like countless black lightning bolts, constantly flashing and then extinguishing among the cavalry. In just a few breaths, the big black horse had crossed paths with the dozens of grassland cavalrymen. A series of muffled groans could be heard. The cavalrymen either covered their bleeding necks or covered their bleeding chests as they fell from their horses one after another, smashing onto the hard ground of the meadow with loud thuds. Ning Ke did not even look at the cavalrymen and continued to charge above the meadow. The big black horse was too fast, and so was the speed at which he waved his knife. In a moment, he had killed more than 10 cavalrymen. The meadow was stained with blood, but not a single drop of blood could be seen on him and the big black horse. The leader of the cavalry on the meadow suddenly turned pale. Last night, he had already known that the enemy this time was a cultivator. It was not that he had never fought with cultivators from the Ueluan kingdom, and he had even killed a master in the see-through state. He thought that he had taken the matter seriously enough, But he did not expect that the enemy today was not just a cultivator who only knew how to control a flying sword, but also a cultivator who was so terrifying. With a loud shout, more than 10 cavalrymen drew their bows and released arrows. However, the big black horse was too fast, and most of the arrows missed. Occasionally, the arrows that were shot in front of the horse were casually blocked by Ning Kei's knife. In a moment, Ning Kei rode the big black horse onto the meadow. The sound of the padao slicing through the air rang out, followed by the sound of blood splattering. The archers did not even have time to put up any resistance before they were killed by the knife. The leader of the cavalry had just raised the machete in his hand when he found that his chest had been pierced by a grayish-black padao. At that moment, he could even feel the coldness of the tank-style padao. He fell to the ground and looked at the enemy who had completely ignored him. Extreme fear appeared in his gray eyes, but that fear soon turned into pleasure. He thought to himself that no matter how strong Ning Kei was, the people in the carriage must have been killed. How could Ning Kei bring them back to life? The leader of the cavalry's right foot was still in the stirrup. The warhorse was startled and dragged him a few feet on the ground. The shock caused blood to gush out his chest. The scene of the cavalry besieging the carriage under the meadow entered his eyes. His face suddenly turned extremely pale, and at the last moment before he died, he groaned unwillingly. Ning Kei rode on the big black horse and rushed to the meadow. In a very short time, he killed the leader of the cavalrymen and more than a dozen archers. He did not rush back to the meadow to rescue Sang Sang. Instead, he rode on the big black horse through the corpses of the cavalrymen and picked up 2 bows and a few quivers of arrows before turning the horse around. At the bottom of the meadow, at least 30 cavalrymen were besieging the black carriage. The carriage stood alone in the same spot, unable to move. It looked like a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. However, when the cavalrymen tried to break the carriage, they were shocked to find that their machetes could not even leave a mark on the carriage, let alone break it open. It was then that the cavalrymen realized that the carriage was not a lamb, but the terrifying black armored cavalrymen of the Tang Empire. They wore thick armor and stood there motionless, allowing the cavalrymen to hack at them. There was no way they could break through it. As time passed, the cavalrymen besieging the carriage became more and more anxious and even a little desperate. Several cavalrymen got off their horses and walked to the side of the carriage, slashing at the wheels. In their minds, even if the carriage was made of stainless steel, the wheels were at most wooden wheels covered with iron. With their strength and the sharpness of their machetes, they should be able to break the wheels. If they could break the wheels, even if the person in the carriage survived, he would not be able to move an inch in the wilderness. In the end, he would still be suppressed to death by the warriors of the royal court and the masters of the temple. However, these grassland cavalrymen once again fell into despair. After a round of slashing, they realized that the carriage, from the inside to the outside, was made of stainless steel. In their despair, they could not help but feel a strong sense of indignation and anger. A carriage made entirely of stainless steel. Was it not even heavier than the golden Buddha worshipped by the royal court? How could such a heavy carriage travel on the wilderness and gallop so quickly? It was also at this moment that some of the cavalrymen noticed the end of the battle on the meadow. Looking at the black lightning speeding down from above the meadow, they could not help but cry out in fear. A commotion gradually arose. A slightly older cavalryman shouted sternly. He knew that it was impossible for them to defeat the powerful enemy, so he made a decision in a very short time. He sent out 2 of the most skillful cavalrymen to leave the battle on the meadow and ordered them to inform the main cavalry of the royal court at all costs. The rest of the cavalrymen were organized by him and charged toward the enemy. Looking at the 2 cavalrymen who left the carriage and galloped away at high speed, Ning Kei guessed their intentions. He took the bow he had picked up earlier from the side of the horse, knocked an arrow on the string, and took aim silently. The bow was made of boxwood, the standard equipment for elite grassland cavalrymen and powerful horse gangs. It was also the professional equipment that Ning Kei had used to kill horse gangs in the past. Before the primordial 13 arrows were invented, he had always used this bow. The familiar bow and arrow The familiar geographical environment, the familiar battlefield, and the even more powerful Shubi Lake woodcutters. This sudden battle could not have a second outcome. Two sounds of bowstring vibrating were heard, followed by a crisp snap of the bowstring. The two cavalrymen who had left the meadow in the opposite direction to report the news shook and fell off their horses. Their corpses with arrows in their chests were dragged by the war horses for a long distance before they stopped. Looking at the boxwood bow with the broken string, Ning Ke frowned slightly. After cultivating the Great Spirit, his body was much stronger and stronger than before. Now that he had been using iron bows and arrows for a long time, without using ordinary weapons, he was not used to it. The frown only lasted for a moment. He still had a boxwood bow in his hand. Aiming at the cavalryman under the meadow, he knocked an arrow and shot again. The sound of the bow breaking through the air could be heard. Every time the bowstring vibrated, a cavalryman would fall. Then he raised his padao again. There were corpses all over the meadow. Hot blood poured on the withered grass that had been crushed by the frost, melting the thin frost and making the grass branches vibrate slightly. Then it condensed into a thicker and heavier blood frost that pressed down on the withered grass again. Ning Ke walked among the corpses of the cavalrymen and skillfully picked up the spoils of war according to his habit in the past. Now that he could not exchange the enemy's heads for military merits or silver, he naturally would not bother to chop off the heads. He just picked up the intact bow, an arrow, and 2 pairs of leather boots from the corpses of the 2 cavalrymen. A soft sound came from the black carriage. Sang Sang pushed open the door from inside and walked out. She rubbed her sleepy eyes and looked at Ning Quebec. She asked what happened. It was so noisy earlier. Ning Ke walked towards her and said, I killed some people. Only then did Sang Sang notice that there were corpses all around the carriage. She could not help but be slightly startled. Ning Ke raised the 2 pairs of leather boots in his hand and said, I got 2 pairs of shoes. You could try them on later. Sang Sang shook her head and said, You brought back so many pairs of shoes over the years, but none of them fit me. I think I have to change them myself this time. There was a typo in the previous chapter. It should have been silver starlight instead of moonlight. I was so happy when I wrote about Song Song's favorite silver world. In fact, the most troublesome thing in writing this book was to avoid these words. Other than the Yueluan Kingdom, which was interesting, the moon did not appear in other places. I remember writing about the white of the moon. Now that I think about it, there's no way to go around it. I was adjusting for the time difference today, so I didn't sleep. After writing this chapter, I still have to sleep for a while. Anyway, there will be another chapter today, so it will definitely be at night. But I really like this chapter. This is not narcissism. I really like it. This is what I want. The so-called pass together. I need monthly votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 613. Over the next few days, the Black Horse carriage encountered several groups of grassland cavalries in the wilderness. Ning Ke killed 2 of the smaller groups with extreme coldness. When he used his binoculars to observe that there were more than 300 elite cavalries, he did not hesitate to take a detour to avoid them. If there was anyone in the wilderness who could organize 300 elite cavalries, it would either be a cavalry unit under the direct command of the palace or the main force of a large tribe. No matter how confident Ning Ke was, he did not want to confront such an enemy head-on. One of the reasons was that the big black horse was not wearing armor. More importantly, no matter how powerful he was after entering the knowing destiny state, no matter how strong his body was, no matter how vigorous his psyche power was, he would not be able to withstand the waves of enemies. His psyche power would eventually be depleted, and his body would gradually become exhausted. If he was forced into such a situation by continuous enemies, there was nothing he could do but wait for death. 1,000 years ago, the Desolate lost the war with the Tangs. According to the surrender agreement, they gave up the wilderness and moved to the cold region and hot sea in the extreme north. The people of the Central Plains could not adapt to the life in the wilderness, so they did not migrate to the north in large numbers. After the Desolate left, the gap was filled by barbarians who moved from the extreme west and gradually evolved into the grassland barbarians of today. The grassland tribes were scattered on the vast land in the north of the mainland like stars in the sky. Because of the natural boundaries of Min Mountain, they were divided into 3 palaces. Among them, the Golden Palace was the strongest, while the Right Palace was the weakest because of its small population and the fact that most of its herdsmen believed in Buddhism. The several groups of cavalries that Ning Ke met in the wilderness were from the Right Palace or the tribes under the jurisdiction of the palace. He had already guessed that these barbarians who worship Buddhism must have received an order from the Xiankong Temple. The cavalries of the Right Palace did not pose a real threat to the Black Horse carriage. However, thousands of cavalries came one after another and searched the wilderness at all costs. In the end, the Black Horse carriage was slowed down. One day, when the black carriage passed by a red and barren rocky mountain, snow suddenly fell from the cold sky of the wilderness. The snowflakes were like cotton being torn into pieces, slowly falling to the ground. It seemed gentle, but because the temperature of the ground was too low, the snow accumulated very quickly. It didn't take long for the red rocky mountain to be painted white. Sang Sang found a large piece of white cloth from somewhere and used it to cover the walls of the black carriage. Then she used the rest of the white cloth to make some simple cuts and used it to cover the big black horse. Looking at the carriage wrapped in white cloth and the big black horse, as well as its eyes that were exposed through the holes in the white cloth, Ning Ke's mood changed slightly. He felt that he had seen such a naturally evil scene before, but he could not remember where. The wind and snow became more and more blinding, and the road in the wilderness became more and more difficult to travel. Ning Ke drove the horse carriage around the rock mountain and found a slightly higher but hidden place to stop. He took out his binoculars and looked down at the wilderness. The wilderness had become a monotonous world of black and white. Snowflakes fluttered down from the sky. It was completely silent. No sound could be heard, and no moving figures could be seen. Ning Ke held the cold telescope and looked at the wilderness quietly for a long time. He did not lose his patience because of the desolate and boring world in the mirror. Finally, he saw what he wanted to see, or rather, what he did not want to see. 10 monks appeared in the field of vision through the telescope. Those monks were wearing thick, snow-white cotton robes and shoes woven from dense grass. Under the shoes, there were slender wooden boards that were slightly tilted at the front and back. In their hands, there were 2 thin and hard iron staffs. Gliding in the wind and snow, their speed was as fast as a galloping horse. Ning Ke guessed that these monks were from Xiankong Temple. He could not help but frown. He thought that Xiankong Temple was far away from the human world and had experienced wind, frost, rain, and snow for a long time. It seemed that the monks in the temple had adapted well to the environment of the wilderness. Even the wind and snow could not stop them. It was really troublesome. What surprised him more was that these monks did not wear felt hats or leather boots. The cold and heat seemed to have lost their power to them. In terms of the concept of cultivation, these monks had already entered the see-through realm. Although he was vigilant, he did not leave immediately. Instead, he continued to sit in front of the window and observe. He observed the Xiankong Temple monks passing by and calculated the area of the surrounding wilderness, the speed of these monk soldiers, and the frequency of their search. Then he told Sang Sang in a low voice. Sang Sang wrote down the numbers on a piece of paper. After thinking for a while, she raised her head and said, "At least 200 people are needed for their search in this wilderness to be meaningful." The holy land of Buddhism would naturally not do something meaningless. Her words revealed a fact. There were at least 200 Xiankong Temple monks in the wilderness where the Black Horse carriage was. What did 200 see-through realm mean? Even the Tang Empire could hardly gather 200 see-through realm cultivators. Ning Ke was silent. He had thought that only the West Hill Divine Palace could send out so many masters at any time and place. He did not expect that Xiankong Temple could also do so. He did not have the confidence to defeat 200 Xiankong Temple monks. He did not even have the intention to fight. If he was given enough time to roam and kill slowly for 2 or 3 years, he might really be able to kill all these ascetic monks. However, how Ian and Buddha would not give him and Sang that much time. He did not understand why the grassland cavalry and the monks of the Xiankong Temple were always able to find the black horse carriage in the vast and boundless wilderness. Ning Kei's puzzlement and vigilance were once again verified in the next moment. The horse carriage's camouflage was good enough. All traces on the snow had been erased by him, and the wind and snow obscured their vision. However, the two groups of ascetic monks on the wilderness seemed to faintly sense something. They stabbed the snow with their staffs and walked towards the rocky mountain without hesitation. Ning Kei knew that he could not continue to hide. He punched the wall of the carriage heavily. Hearing the heavy pounding coming from behind, the big black horse's breathing suddenly quickened. The moisture exhaling from its mouth and nose passed through the white cloth and turned into white mist in the cold wind and snow. Its eyes that were exposed outside the holes revealed a violent and excited emotion. Its hind hooves kicked hard and pulled the horse carriage out of the rocky mountain. The 20 Xiankong Temple ascetic monks on the wilderness faintly saw a white figure in the wind and snow. Their expressions suddenly turned serious. The iron staffs in their hands were so fast that they seemed to turn into shadows. The wooden boards under their feet rubbed against the soft snow at high speed as they chased after the white figure, trying to stop it. Ning Kei did not sit in the carriage. He stood behind the big black horse and looked at the ascetic monks gliding at high speed on the snowy ground. He waited in silence as the wind and snow hit his face. There were 50 arrows in the quiver beside the shaft and 2 boxwood bows. He also carried a boxwood bow on his shoulder. If the monks of Xiankong Temple came near, the bowstring would make a series of beads. The ascetic monks glided across the snowy ground at high speed, their expressions stern and determined. From time to time, they would let out a few low shouts. In their view, the sudden snowstorm today was the Buddha's anger towards the daughter of Yama. In a snowy environment, no matter how fast the carriage was, it could not be compared to them. However, these ascetic monks did not know that Ning Kei's horse carriage was different from ordinary horse carriages in the world. The wheels touched the ground very lightly. No matter how soft the snow was, it could not affect it. The big black horse neighed excitedly. Its 4 hooves were as fast as lightning, splashing up countless snowflakes. The white cloth covering its body flapped in the snowy wind. It carried the seemingly heavy carriage forward at high speed on the snowy ground. About 10 breaths later, the carriage gradually left the ski-wielding monks far behind. The wheels of the carriage only left a very shallow rut on the snow. It seemed that they would be temporarily safe after getting rid of these ascetic monks. However, reality and imagination were always very different. After that encounter in the snowy ground, the black horse carriage encountered several batches of Xiankong Temple ascetic monks in the wilderness in a very short period of time. Although they managed to avoid them all the time, they had to adjust their direction, and escape became more difficult. The continuous encounters with enemies increased the pace of their escape. The atmosphere in the carriage gradually became tense. For the first time, the big black horse's eyes, which were not covered by the cloth, showed anxiety instead of excitement. It even became a little uneasy. Ning Kei understood that the grassland cavalry they encountered a few days ago was only a prelude. Only when the Xiankong Temple monks joined in the chase in the wilderness would their escape truly begin. At this moment, he once again thought of the thing that made him vigilant and puzzled. His and Song's whereabouts had been exposed, but eldest brother, who had entered the limitless state, had never appeared. It was because eldest brother did not know where he was. Then how could Xiankong Temple accurately find his whereabouts every time? He looked at the corner of the carriage, and his eyes fell on the chessboard. After thinking for a while, he picked up the chessboard and placed it on his knees. Then he took out the big black umbrella and tore a piece of cloth from the edge of the umbrella to wrap it around the chessboard. During the escape, the black horse carriage stopped beside a withered, jade-like tree that had long been frozen by the snow. Ning Kei picked up the chessboard wrapped by the black umbrella's cloth and jumped off the carriage. He took out his padao and dug a deep hole under the tree. Without hesitation, he threw the chessboard in and filled the hole. The black horse carriage moved again. The snow and wind were strong. After a while, the ground under the withered tree was covered with a thick layer of snow. Even if someone stood in front of the tree, they would not be able to tell that it had been dug. Sang Sang said, "I think it's a pity." Ning Ke said, "If the Buddha's chessboard were to be auctioned in Chang, and it would definitely fetch a large sum of money. Who knows, it would be a pity to throw it away like this." Sang Sang whispered, "That's not what I meant." Ning Ke said, "I remember that you like to play chess. I'll make a good one for you in the future. How about white jade?" Sang Sang said, "It's a pity that a piece of the big black umbrella has been torn off." Ning Ke was startled and then laughed. Half a day later, dozens of Xiankong temple ascetic monks held their poles and skied to the snow valley where the black horse carriage had stopped. Their monk robes fluttered like snowflakes dancing in the wind. Chi Mei, the president of the Hall of Respect of Xiankong Temple, stepped forward in silence. He looked at the Buddhist artifact that looked like a compass in his hand and the Buddha's finger relic inlaid on it. He frowned slightly. The Buddha's finger relic could guide believers to find the artifacts and relics he had left in the world. This was the real reason why the black horse carriage could not get rid of the pursuit. However, at this time, the Buddha's finger relic was unusually calm and did not move at all. It seemed that it could no longer sense the whereabouts of the chessboard. Chi Mei's expression was slightly solemn. He knew that the Buddhism sect had missed the best chance to kill the daughter of Yama. He secretly chanted the name of Buddha and silently prayed that this would not be the last chance. A few miles away, a withered tree in the snow that looked like a jade carving trembled in the wind, as if it was nodding. "I'm so sleepy that I immediately go to sleep. I hope that I can write it during the day tomorrow." To be continued. If you like this work, please Kamachidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 614. In the depths of the western wilderness, a dusty scholar appeared at the edge of the giant sinkhole. He looked at the yellow temple in the middle of the giant sinkhole and asked, "Where's my youngest brother?" The scholar was the eldest brother of the academy. After the news that the black horse carriage had appeared in the Xiankong temple reached Chang, and he once again embarked on his journey to find Ning Ke. Even though he looked haggard and his state was gradually unstable, his voice was very soft. In the wilderness full of wind and snow, it could only spread a few feet before disappearing. However, someone in the yellow temple among the distant giant peaks clearly heard it. A calm and dignified voice slowly sounded in the air in front of the eldest senior brother. It was like a letter that had been opened and was calmly revealed to the people who wanted to read the letter. It was the voice of the chief preaching monk of the Xiankong temple. "Ning Ke will naturally be where the daughter of Yama is." The eldest brother looked at the temple in the snow and mist and kept silent for a long time. He knew what the chief preaching monk meant, but he did not know how to answer, so he could only keep silent. The voice of the chief preaching monk once again sounded in front of him, like a wake-up bell. The human world is a human world. There are many hardships, but there are also many joys. Everyone has the responsibility and obligation to maintain the existence of this world. This is also the reason why the daughter of Yama cannot exist. Killing the daughter of Yama is not a matter of Buddhism and Taoism, but the will of the entire human world. Since Ning Ke wants to live and die with her, if the Academy wants to protect Ning Ke, it will go against the will of the entire human world. The Academy is the foundation of the Tang Empire. However, now even many people in the Tang Empire have begun to oppose the position of the Academy. How can you defeat the entire world? Can't the headmaster even understand this? The eldest brother covered his mouth and coughed painfully. His face was a little pale. More than 10 days ago, the West Hill Divine Palace officially announced the true identity of the daughter of Yama to the world, which directly led to the fiercest dispute in the Tang Empire for hundreds of years. The reason was the relationship between Ning Ke and the daughter of Yama. The Academy had not clearly expressed its attitude, so almost all officials and people questioned the Academy. The voice of the chief, preaching monk of Xiankong Temple rose with the wind and snow on the edge of the sinkhole. It was full of pity and affirmation. Even if you know where Ninkei is and find the black horse carriage, what can you do? Could you kill everyone in the world and bring the black horse carriage back to the academy? You can't take them away, and you can't stop people from looking at you. Even if you are the fastest person in the world, and even if the headmaster of the academy personally takes action, it will be meaningless in the face of the omnipresent gazes and the invisible fear and hatred. They tore off the pieces of the black umbrella and buried the Buddhist chessboard. The ascetic monks scattered in the wilderness by Xiankong Temple could no longer track the black horse carriage as easily as they did a few days ago. The cavalry of the Right King's palace had lost the light of Buddha to guide the way, so it was difficult for them to organize an effective interception line. In the days that followed, the black carriage's escape went very smoothly. It was so peaceful and happy that it didn't seem like it was escaping, but more like a long journey across the wilderness. For ordinary people, the wilderness in autumn and winter was cold and desolate, and there was a serious lack of prey. If they left the team and acted alone, they would easily get lost or fall into a hopeless situation because of running out of supplies. But for Ninkei and Sang Sang, this was the environment they were most familiar with and most liked. Just like when they were young in Min Mountain, they would rather deal with ferocious beasts and cruel nature than talk to the seemingly rough but actually cunning hunters in the hunting stockade. The boxwood bough buzzed from time to time, and the feather arrows pierced through the wind and snow and accurately shot the prey. That was a delicious pot of meat soup or an attractive roast on the fire rack. Whether it was the snow rabbit that even the best hunters could hardly find, or the strong snow yak that even a small grassland tribe could not kill, they were all food that Ninkei could easily obtain. Walking in the wilderness, Ninkei and Sang Sang were like fish swimming in the stream, hunting, hiding, collecting snow, and boiling water. Everything was so familiar, as if they were living a long time ago again. A horse neigh that tried hard to suppress its joy pierced through the wind and snow. The horse's hooves stepped on the snow and returned silently. Ninkei jumped off the horse, holding a snow wolf that had been skinned. The big black horse touched the white cloth cover, and its exposed eyes were full of desire. Not long after, a pot of snow wolf soup was cooked, and the fragrance was tightly sealed inside the carriage. Outside the carriage, the big black horse was chewing the meat and shaking its head happily. Ninkei filled a bowl with soup and put a few pieces of wolf meat in it, and handed it to Sang Sang. Sang Sang drank the soup and ate a piece of wolf meat. She said, "I have said that wolf meat is too coarse and not delicious." Ninkei said, "I walked around and didn't see anything else." Sang Sang said, "If Tong Tong's little wolf knows that you eat wolf meat, it will hate you." Ninkei said with a smile, "Even the big black wolf is not afraid of the little wolf. Why should I care? Moreover, although they are both snow wolves, they are not relatives. Tong Tong's little snow wolf is a snowfield dire wolf, which is different from the ones we eat." Ninkei ate half of the wolf meat soup and put the rest outside the carriage to freeze. Then he returned to the carriage to rest for a while. Seeing that Sang Sang was staring at the black chess piece in a daze, he asked, "What are you thinking about?" Sang Sang raised her head and looked at him. She said, "I am thinking about what I said to you in the Wa Mountain Monastery." Ninkei's expression changed slightly, and he said, "Those last words." Sang Sang nodded. Ninkei said, "Why are you thinking about those messy things? Now I have figured out that the cold aura in your body is not an illness, but a mark left by Yama. Naturally, you will not die." Sang Sang looked down at the black chess piece in her palm and said, "If the cold aura is the mark left by Yama in my body, then does the illness mean that the daughter of Yama has woken up?" Ninkei thought for a while and said, "Maybe it is." Sang Sang retracted her fingers and held the black chess piece tightly in her palm. After a long silence, she said, "If my illness breaks out again, what should I do? Will I die?" Ninkei held her in his arms and gently patted her back. He said, "You are the daughter of Yama. How can you die?" Sang Sang leaned against his chest and said in a trembling voice, "But I am worried that the moment the daughter of Yama wakes up, I will be gone, and so will Sang Sang." Ninkei understood her words and hugged her tighter. He said, "I don't know, but I think the headmaster must have other ways to cure your illness. Sang Sang looked up at him and asked, "Do you really trust the academy so much?" Since the moment he killed people in the woodshed of the official of council's mansion, Ninkei had never completely trusted anyone except Sang Sang, including the people in the city of Wei. He seemed to be casual, but was actually suspicious. He looked gentle, but was actually cold and heartless. Sang Sang knew what kind of person he was, so she could not understand why his trust in the academy had not been shaken until now. As I said, if this is the last trust, of course I will leave it to the headmaster. From a rational point of view, we should not trust anyone now, including the headmaster. But these years of studying and living in the academy have made me realize that it is tiring, hard, and boring to be a rational person. Ninkei looked at the wind and snow outside the window and said, "Especially now, the whole world has abandoned us. If we don't even trust the headmaster and senior brother, we will become more lonely." In the late autumn, the wind and snow in the wilderness gradually stopped. More and more herdsmen could be seen on the road, and even a caravan could be seen. The further to the southeast of the wilderness, the more people there were. Everyone in the wilderness was a pair of eyes of the Xiankong temple. It became more and more difficult for Ninkei to hide his whereabouts. During the day, he could often see smoke signals, and at night, he could occasionally see fireworks. The shortest route from the West Wilderness to the Tang Empire was to enter the territory of the Golden Palace in the northeast and then enter from the south. However, the ascetic monks of the Xiankong Temple and the cavalry of the Right King's Palace had already densely covered the wilderness in the northeast. Ninkei even believed that the army of the Yueluan Kingdom was waiting for him further away. Moreover, the northeast route was too dangerous. He knew better than anyone how powerful the cavalry of the Golden Palace was. The most troublesome thing was that between the Golden Palace and the West Wilderness, there was an unfreezing swamp that stretched for thousands of miles. It would be very risky to force his way through. These were not difficult tests for Ninkei, because he had already changed his escape plan based on a speculation of the eldest brother's limitless state. He had been heading northeast for the past few days just to confuse the enemy. He did not know that the eldest brother had gone to the Xiankong Temple to find him, and that he and Sang Sang were not alone. However, he was clear that if he wanted to get out of the current predicament, the best way was to let the eldest brother find him. He had no knowledge of the legendary limitless state. Even if he let his mind guess blindly, he would not be able to figure out how such a godly person could travel in the wind. However, since he insisted on trusting the academy and the eldest brother, he could speculate on the basis of trust and come to a conclusion. People in Chang must have known that he and Sang Sang were in the western wilderness. Eldest brother didn't show up, probably because he couldn't confirm the specific location of him and Sang Sang. This also meant that the distanceless state wasn't just about freedom. It required a relatively accurate map in the consciousness and a fixed point. Therefore, his target was the capital of the Yueluan Kingdom. One day, the sky was clear and boundless. What Ninkei had been most worried about had finally happened. Sang Sang's little face turned a little pale. She began to cough. She did not cough up phlegm or blood. Instead, she coughed out cold air, like the melting ice outside the carriage. Out of nowhere, a dark cloud floated over and hung in the sky above the black carriage. "Sorry, there's only one chapter today. No other problems. I just re-examined the outline and found a lot of problems. I feel that the original plot content is not right and is too complicated. Therefore, I plan to revise it tonight and cut off all the branches and leaves. However, they are all meat that I can't bear to part with, so the process of cutting them off must be very painful. I don't have the energy to do anything else. After I revise and cut off the outline, the rest will be fine. Tomorrow is Saturday, but there will be more than 3 chapters. This week's rest day will be on Sunday, because it is someone's birthday. Well, for us people in Yichang, this is the most important birthday of our lives. I wish everyone a happy weekend. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 615. Oddly shaped clouds often appeared in the sky of the wilderness. Ninkei did not see the cloud above the horse carriage. Even if he had seen it, he would not have paid much attention to it, because such a scene was too common, and because his mind was completely focused on Sang Sang. Every time she coughed, he became more nervous. Thinking of what Master Chishan had said in the Lang Temple, he asked Sang Sang to continue chanting Buddhist scriptures and cultivating Dharma, hoping to temporarily stabilize the cold aura in her body. But he had a bad feeling. In the next few days, there were no cavalry from the palace or ascetic monks from the Xiankong Temple. The journey was peaceful, and Ning Ke finally noticed the cloud above the horse carriage. The sky was clear and blue, like washed porcelain. There were no clouds at all, but there was a lonely cloud hanging quietly above their heads. It was hard not to notice it. The sun was in the middle of the sky, covered by the cloud. Looking up from the ground of the wilderness, the edge of the cloud seemed to be embroidered with a golden edge. The cloud inside the golden edge was incomparably white, formed by countless extremely fine strands of cloud. It was like a big cotton candy, making people want to reach out and touch it. The lonely cloud covered the sun, casting a shadow of dozens of feet on the ground, which happened to cover the black horse carriage. Ning Ke found it interesting and did not think much about it. He put down the curtain and signaled the big black horse to continue forward. He did not notice that when the horse carriage moved on the ground of the wilderness, the lonely cloud in the sky moved with the carriage. The shadow also moved on the wilderness, always covering the black horse carriage. The big black horse believed in the philosophy of living in the present. Its eyes would always stay on the food in front of it, the road under its feet, and the area between the legs of the female horse. It was too lazy to look further, so it did not notice that it was always walking in the shadow. It only felt cool and comfortable. The wilderness in late autumn was very cold. Except for silly horses like the big black horse, no one would think that coolness was a pleasure. Ning Ke and Sang Sang in the carriage did not want to hear anything related to cold. The carriage was filled with coldness. There was a place beside the window that was not covered by silk, revealing the cast steel board. There was already a layer of frost on it. One could imagine how low the temperature in the carriage was. Sang Sang put on a pair of flannel pants, wrapped herself in a black fur coat, and buried herself in the quilt. Even so, she did not feel warm at all. Her face was pale, her lips were blue, and there was frost on her eyelashes. Ning Ke added 2 pieces of food paper into the brass brazier, took out a leather bag, and put it in front of her face. Inside the leather bag was the hard liquor they had looted from a small tribe 10 days ago. Sang Sang shook her head, indicating that she would do it herself. She took the wine bag and poured the wine into her mouth. After a while, the wine bag gradually became flat. Perhaps because she drank too fast, or because of her illness, Sang Sang put down the wineskin, frowned, and coughed. The talisman fire in the brass brazier suddenly dimmed, and then gradually struggled to reignite. Just like the past few days, she did not cough up phlegm or blood. Every time she coughed out an extremely cold breath. The breath suddenly turned into white mist when it came into contact with the hot and humid air in the carriage. The cold aura in Sang Sang's body became heavier and heavier. Every day, some of it was expelled from her body as she coughed. The aura did not seem to belong to the human world. It was so cold that even the talisman fire could not withstand it. So the temperature in the carriage became lower and lower, which was why there was frost on the window. With a light cough, the temperature in the carriage gradually dropped. Ning Ke threw another food paper into the brass brazier to barely keep it going. He had used too many fire talismans these days. The food paper he had stored, especially the fire talisman, had long been used up. Now he was using one that he had written on the way, which consumed a lot of his psyche power. It made him look a little haggard. Using the heat from the outside could slightly neutralize the cold, but it could not eliminate the cold aura in Sang Sang's body. It could only treat the symptoms. Master Chishan had said when he treated Sang Sang in the Lang Temple that even if he cultivated in Buddhism and used Buddha's nature to suppress and calm the cold aura, it could only treat the symptoms, but could not eradicate it. Ning Ke knew that if he wanted to completely eliminate the cold aura in Sang Sang's body and prevent Yama from seeing her, he could only hide in the world of Buddha's chessboard for the past 2 years. Song Song's coughing became more frequent, and her condition became more and more troublesome. He became more and more anxious. It took a lot of effort to suppress the idea of turning back to the depths of the wilderness and digging out the chessboard that he had buried. The chessboard's aura of Buddha had completely disappeared and was no longer of any use. He struggled to maintain his rationality. He was even more determined to go to the capital of Ueluan Kingdom first. That Buddhist kingdom had the most Buddhist temples in the world. Even if he could not meet eldest brother for the time being, he could let Sang Sang read more Buddhist scriptures and find more Buddha's nature to temporarily calm the cold aura in her body. It would not be as dangerous as it was now. In late autumn, the cold wind in the wilderness gradually became stronger. After that snowfall, there was no more snow. Occasionally, snow clouds gathered in the sky, but they were instantly blown away by the strong wind. Only one cloud remained quietly in the sky, unaffected. The lonely cloud moved toward the southeast, casting a faint cloud shadow on the ground of the wilderness. The black horse carriage silently moved in the shadow, heading into the distance. The black horse carriage finally walked out of the wilderness and came to a border pass in the north of Ueluan Kingdom. At this time, the wilderness behind the horse carriage was already filled with cold wind and snow in winter. However, the world in front of the horse carriage was still in autumn. A few autumn trees in the border pass were bright red, as if they were burning. Although he did not know the specific situation in Ueluan Kingdom, he could roughly guess. Ninkei parked the black horse carriage in a call outside the border pass and went to gather information. After a while, he returned to the call and walked into the carriage. Sang Sang looked at his expression and vaguely understood something. She smiled and said, "What do I look like in the portrait?" Ninkei took out a piece of paper and unfolded it in front of her. He said, "Look at it yourself." When he entered the border pass earlier, he quickly confirmed the current situation. That was because the streets of the border town were filled with Song Song's wanted posters, and Song Song's identity was clearly written on them. The paper was still fresh. It should have been posted no more than 5 days ago. Sang Sang looked at the skinny handmaiden in the portrait and found that she really looked like her. She sincerely praised, "The painter of Ueluan Kingdom is really good." Even Song Song's slightly withered hair was drawn vividly in the portrait. Ninkei pointed at a line of small words beside the handmaiden's cotton dress and said, "Of course the painter of West Hill Divine Palace is good." Sang Sang said helplessly, "So the Divine Hall also wants to catch me." Ninkei smiled and said, "We both have acquaintances in the West Hill Divine Palace. If we are really going to be caught, why not let Hong Yu catch us? I think she will at least give us a quick death for the sake of our friendship. There is no need to burn us." Sang Sang said softly, "It's not funny." Ninkei did not say anything else. He left the call on the big black horse and went around the border town, heading toward the hilly area in the east of Ueluan Kingdom. Sang Sang thought to herself, "Isn't the capital of Ueluan Kingdom in the south?" Even though she was confused, she trusted Ning Quebec. She was also a little tired, so she did not ask. A few days later, the black horse carriage arrived at the east of Ueluan Kingdom. Looking at the mountains from afar, Ninkei stopped the big black horse when they were still far from the border. After passing through the mountains, they could see the land of the Tang Empire. Ninkei had seen on the map that the residence of the Jinshi general of the Tang Empire should be more than 400 miles away in Zhizhou City. With the speed of the big black horse, it would only take him less than a day to see the Tang military flag that he had not seen for a long time, if no one stopped him. He knew very well that the route from Ueluan Kingdom to the Tang Empire would definitely be filled with countless cultivators. That was why from the beginning, this route was not part of his plan. However, knowing was one thing. Seeing that his homeland was so close, how could he be satisfied if he did not personally take a look and confirm it? Don't force yourself. Let go if you feel tired. In the carriage, he looked at Sang Sang and said solemnly. Sang Sang nodded gently and took the broken big black umbrella from him. She reached out her right hand and held it tightly. Then, she slowly closed her eyes and did not open the umbrella. A moment later, her small face became increasingly pale. Her slightly trembling eyelashes were like leaves on snow blown by the wind. Her right hand that was holding the umbrella also began to tremble. Her thin and weak body also began to tremble. Sang Sang suddenly coughed. Ning Ke did not hesitate to reach out and take the big black umbrella back from her hand. Then he held her in his arms and kept rubbing her back. After a long while, her coughing stopped. Sang Sang put her head on his chest and closed her eyes. Her body was still trembling, and her voice was tired and weak. She said, "There are many people, very powerful people." Ning Ke did not say anything and continued to hold her. After a while, Sang Sang opened her eyes and said in a low voice, "I don't dare to open the big black umbrella. I'm not in good health and can't see very clearly. You should let me watch for a while." Ning Ke said, "It's enough to know that there are people in front." Sang Sang said, "But I don't know where they are from." Ning Ke said, "The West Hill Divine Palace." "No, I should say they are from Haotian Taoism." He sat by the window and took out his binoculars to look at the mountains in the distance. He watched silently for a long time until the sky turned dark. Finally, he saw several looming sword lights. Looking at the looming sword lights in the mountains in the night, Ning Ke remembered a story from many years ago. Murong Lin Shuang, the saintess of Devil's Doctrine, danced in Tuyang City, and the sword lights crisscrossed the Min Mountain. Numerous Haotian Taoism powerhouses came and forced Xiahou to cook his lover alive, regardless of the anger of the Tang Emperor. That was only the war between Haotian Taoism and Devil's Doctrine. Now that Sang Sang was the daughter of Yama, it was the war between Haotian and Yama. Ning Ke knew that the situation he was facing was definitely more dangerous than what Xiahou had faced. Yi Hongyu must have come. Did the great divine priest of revelation come? What about the hierarch lord? 8 o'clock in the evening, YY 55373. Everyone, come and chat. It's my birthday one day earlier. We mainly talk about the book. If you have time, you're welcome to come and play. It won't be too long, because I still have to write 2 chapters today. If you like this work, please come to Yin. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 6:16. This was the world of Haotian, and Haotian Taoism was the most powerful force. Not to mention the West Hill Divine Palace, which gathered countless powerhouses, just the thousands of Taoist temples in the world. Who knew how much more power Haotian Taoism had hidden? In the wilderness, the Shinkong Temple had sent more than 200 ascetic monks and several masters who were equivalent to knowing Destiny State to chase the Black Horse carriage. It was already very powerful, but the West Hill Divine Palace was a truly terrifying ocean. From the moment the Divine Hall announced that Sang Sang was the daughter of Yama, the ocean began to brew a storm. The raging tide gradually rose from the calm sea, and it would not stop until the Black Horse carriage was completely smashed into pieces. Under the night sky, the mountains separated the Yuelun Kingdom and the Tang Kingdom. Yi Hongyu stood on the highest peak. Her divine robe danced in the wind, but there was no expression on her face. The divine robe of judgment was dark red, brighter than blood and darker than the night sky. No matter how sharp her eyesight was, she could not see the Black Horse carriage in the distance. But she kept looking in that direction, as if she had seen something very interesting, and refused to look away. Dozens of priests and knights from the West Temple were kneeling on the rocky peak in front of her. A deacon of the judicial department in black was reporting the information about the Yuelun Kingdom in a low voice. She looked indifferent, as if she didn't care at all. It seemed that she was not nervous at all about something as important as killing the daughter of Yama. After a long time, Yi Hongyu withdrew her gaze and looked at the dozens of mountains around her. Hidden in those mountains were 400 papal knights of the West Hill Divine Palace, 3 grand cultivators of knowing Destiny State, and more than 10 powerful rogue cultivators from Haotian Taoism. They had also received the summons and were hiding in the mountains under her command. With such a powerful combination, they could even occupy the capital of the Yuelun Kingdom, Chaoyang, overnight before the Buddhism sect could react. It was more than enough to deal with Ning Ke and the 6 Sang Sang. After the deacon of the judicial department finished his report, he still knelt on the ground, waiting for the great God's order. However, after waiting for a long time, he still didn't hear the voice that made him incomparably awestruck. He couldn't help but raise his head to look at the graceful figure on the cliff and asked respectfully, "Great God?" No one knew what Yi Hong Yu was thinking about. She was lost in her thoughts and only woke up when she heard this. She looked to the west again and said with a smile, "That guy is more cunning than a thief. How could he not guess that Hao Yi and Taoism would make arrangements here? I'm afraid he has already left. If that's the case, why should I wait here like an idiot?" The black-robed executors were somewhat startled. From the words of the divine priest of judgment, it seemed that she was preparing to leave. However, the Taoist sect had set up an ambush in the Tsong Mountains. This was an order personally issued by the sect master. Who would dare to disobey? Yi Hong Yu walked down the mountain. A deputy commander of the Divine Guards stood up in shock. He looked at the back of her robe, fluttering in the wind, and said, "Great God, this is an order from the hierarch. Where are you going?" In the Tsong Mountains, in this world, there were very few people who were qualified to ask Yi Hong Yu for an answer. Therefore, she didn't answer. But when she walked past the deacon, she said, "I'm going to the quagmire." The deacon was her direct subordinate. She told him her whereabouts for the affairs of the Divine Hall of Judgment. This didn't mean that she needed to report her whereabouts to anyone else, even the hierarch. The people on the peak were stunned when they heard this. Even the deacon was shocked. He anxiously tried to dissuade her. The quagmire? The 1,000-mile swamp between the Yueluan Kingdom and the Golden Palace? Great God, it's too dangerous. No one has ever chosen that path for so many years. The path that no one has chosen is the path that Ning Ke will take. After saying this, Yi Hong Yu floated away. Her ink-red robe fluttered on the mountain path. When it fluttered, it was like a bloody flag. When it fell, it was like the night sky. The people of the West Hill Divine Palace knelt on the peak to send her off. The capital city of the Yueluan Kingdom was called Chaoyang City. This name had been passed down for many years. No one knew whether it was Chaoyang or Chaoyang, because both meanings seemed to be the same. There was a green mountain in the north of Chaoyang City. The mountain was rather slow, but it was wide and long. The mountain was covered with dense vegetation. Although there were many tourists, there were many secluded and uninhabited places. The southeast of the Yueluan Kingdom was connected to the Great River and the South Jin Kingdom by a primeval forest. The moisture from the Great Lake, the Great River, and the Southern Ocean were constantly blown into the kingdom by the wind. They were also sealed by the plateau in the west, the wilderness in the north, and the Tsong Mountains in the east. Therefore, it was very warm and humid. It was late autumn, and the wilderness had already been snowing heavily. However, there was not the slightest cold or chilling aura around Chaoyang City. The mountains were covered with dense foliage and green, similar to the spring in Chang and City. At noon, the sun hung high in the sky, spreading its heat to the ground. Chaoyang City and the Green Mountain in the north of the city became increasingly hot and stuffy. Everyone felt a little uncomfortable. Tourists and mountain people rested in the green forest, hiding from the slightly dry autumn sun. Some children played by the spring in the forest. Many dark-skinned ascetic monks sat cross-legged on the mountain path with relatively little shade. Some of the ascetic monks wore the robes of the White Tower Temple, while others came from other places. Their clothes were long tattered. Whether they were local or foreign ascetic monks, the copper bowls in front of them were filled with fruits and food. These fruits and food were naturally offerings from the people of the Yueluan Kingdom who worshiped Buddhism. There were hundreds of banyan trees in the depths of the Green Mountain. Under the trees were long grass and dense shrubs. It was difficult for humans and beasts to walk among them. It was very secluded. Looking at the rotten leaves on the ground, it seemed that no one had been here for decades. Ning Ke picked up the last handful of dead leaves and carefully scattered them evenly on the ground. After confirming that no traces were left behind and that even the intent of the array was perfectly hidden, he felt relieved. His right foot stepped on the thorny bushes, and his body swept to the flat ground a few feet away. He began to give instructions to the big black horse. Normally, the big black horse would have been annoyed to see Ning Ke lecturing like a child. However, he listened very carefully today, and his eyes were very focused. He did not miss a single word. I don't know how long I will stay in Chaoyang City. If I find eldest brother, I will bring Sang Sang and him back first. Then I will ask eldest brother to come back and pick you up. If I can't find him, he will probably wait in the city. You can stay in the mountains for some time. Don't worry, I won't leave you alone. Thank you for your hard work, buddy. Ning-Ke hugged the big black horse's neck and patted it gently. He then picked up a blue cloth bag and tied it around the big black horse's neck. Inside the bag were the few yellow fruits and ginseng and other food left in the carriage. The big black horse rubbed his face and neighed softly at Sang Sang under the tree. It turned around and walked slowly toward the deep mountains behind the dense forest. The blue cloth bag swayed gently. Watching the big black horse's figure disappear into the depths of the green mountain, Ning-Ke walked back to the banyan tree and carried Sang Sang on his back. He tied them tightly with a strong rope and carried the heavy luggage to the city at the foot of the mountain. Everyone in Yuan Kingdom, from the monarch to the peddlers, believed in the Buddhism sect and pursued the state of being aloof from worldly affairs. They were known for being low-key and peaceful, although the Great River Kingdom, which had a feud with the Yuan Kingdom, would certainly not think so. At least within the Yuan Kingdom, there were very few cases of powerful ministers rebelling or shocking murders. It was because of this special philosophy or pursuit that many cities in the Yuan Kingdom did not have city walls, except for the Tang Empire and the Right King's Palace. Even the capital, Chaoyang City, did not have city walls. They only built a simple bamboo fence in the direction of the Great Green Mountain to prevent beasts. Travelers who had been to Chaoyang City and Chang and City always liked to compare the two cities. It was not because Chaoyang City was as magnificent as Chang and City, but because Chaoyang City was at the other extreme. There were no city walls in Chaoyang City, so naturally there were no city gates. The soldiers in charge of collecting business taxes from the royal family placed a few tables and umbrellas on the official road to act as tax gates. Due to the warmth of the 4 seasons, the officials always looked lazy. Some of the soldiers even laid down their clothes and slept under the trees by the road. Everything looked so unruly and unruly. But what made the imperial court of the Yuan Kingdom proud was that Chaoyang City collected more taxes than Chang and City every year. This was not because Chaoyang City was more developed than Chang and City, nor was it because the tax officials were more diligent, nor was it because the citizens of the Yuan Kingdom had the self-awareness to pay taxes to share the burden of the kingdom. There was no secret to this. It was just that the tax collected by the Yuan Kingdom was 10 times that of the Tang Empire. Such an unruly and unruly country, such an inefficient and corrupt imperial court, such an open and chaotic capital, where they could not even defend against wild elephants that occasionally came out of the mountains to hunt for food. How could they defend against foreign enemies? If it were not for the mediation of the Buddhism sect, the Yuan Kingdom would have been destroyed by the cavalry of the Right King's Palace 1,000 years ago. If it were not for the help of the West Hill Divine Palace, they might even have been defeated by the much weaker Great River Kingdom. Chaoyang City was an unguarded capital. Wind and rain could enter. Fortunately, its geographical location was superior. There had been no storms for many years, and people could enter and leave at will. However, most of the people who cultivated in Buddhism were timid, and few dared to try to sneak into the city to avoid the various heavy taxes imposed by the imperial court. One day in late autumn, a white cloud floated into Chaoyang City. No one paid attention to what was happening on the ground, so no one noticed the cloud in the sky. Only a tax officer was lying on the ground and basking in the sun. He looked at the white cloud in the sky, which was sharp on both ends and thick in the middle like a spindle. He smiled foolishly. Right under the white cloud, Ning-Ke carried Sang Sang on his back and held a paper umbrella that he found somewhere. He successfully walked into Chaoyang City, his body covered with a very faint shadow. The air in Chaoyang City was filled with the smell of spices. Buddhist temples could be seen everywhere. The beautiful white pagodas above the temple walls and the small Buddhist shrines by the roadside were inlaid with many precious gems. Beggars holding broken bowls wandered casually, But no one looked at those gems, and no one tried to pry one of them off. Sang Sang rested her head on Ning Kei's shoulder and looked at the scene in front of her. She was a little surprised and murmured, "It is indeed the legendary Buddhist land. Even the beggars are so virtuous." Ning Kei looked at an old beggar at the corner of the street, whose hands had been chopped off by a sharp weapon. He said, "There are only two possibilities. If beggars are so lazy and resigned to their fate, they're destined to be beggars for the rest of their lives. Or they know very well that even if they steal the gems, they will not be able to sell them and will be punished terribly. Try to finish the 3rd chapter before midnight. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 617. Sorry, this is the last chapter of the 3rd volume, so it's a little hard to write. I wrote too much, so it's a little late. Sorry. Sang Sang was the only one on the portraits in the streets, but the Buddhism and Taoism sects knew that Ning Kei was with Sang Sang, and they also knew about the conspicuous black horse carriage that could not be disguised. The black horse carriage was Yin Sei's legacy. The Buddhism and Taoism sects must have thought that he would not give it up. He took advantage of this and left the big black horse and the carriage outside the city, while he took Sang Sang into the city. He chose to hide in Chaoyang City temporarily because he wanted to wait for eldest brother here. Moreover, Sang Sang's illness kept worsening, and he was worried that Sang Sang would not be able to hold on if he had to fight to the end. Even if he could not wait for eldest brother, he had to come to Chaoyang City because he believed that it was always dark under the lamp, and he believed in his ability to hide. He also hoped that the Buddhist temple here could help Sang Sang get better. Walking in Chaoyang City with Sang Sang on his back, Ning Kei did not take long to find his target. It was a shabby courtyard not far from the Yuelin Kingdom's palace. Standing in the courtyard, one could see the famous White Tower Temple, but it was located in a noisy, low-class street, which was convenient for hiding. The most important and decisive reason why he chose this small courtyard was because it was extremely dilapidated. The door was covered in dust, and it was obvious that no one had lived in it for a long time. Furthermore, it was so quiet that it was like a haunted house. Ning Kei did not inquire about the story of the courtyard, because any connection with others might lead to unexpected results. He directly sneaked into the government office of Chaoyang City and secretly searched the case files. As he had expected, an extremely bloody massacre happened in the courtyard last year. The owner of the courtyard died in the massacre, and his relatives, who were qualified to inherit the courtyard, were obsessed with Buddhism and did not want to take over the sinful courtyard. Therefore, the courtyard was taken back by the Yuelin Kingdom, but still no one was willing to buy or rent it. Even the greedy officials and monks had no interest in the courtyard. Of course, Ning Kei would not rent a small courtyard. When dusk fell, he carried Sang Sang on his back and easily jumped into the small courtyard from the broken wall on the back street. He passed through the main hall and came to the bedroom in the backyard. Along the way, the twilight was dim and extremely quiet. The old bricks on the ground and the walls were still stained with dark old bloodstains, causing it to seem extremely gloomy. Not to mention ordinary people, even a butcher who had seen blood would probably feel his scalp go numb. It was no wonder that everyone avoided this house and would rather abandon it than accept it. Ning Kei and Sang Sang had seen countless dead people since they were young, and they had seen much more gruesome scenes than this. However, they showed no fear at all, not even the slightest change of expression. There was no bloodstain in the bedroom, only a dusty bed and a table. After a moment of silence, he walked out of the small courtyard again. When he came back, he held several quilts in his arms and plastering for carpentry in his hand. After a simple cleaning, Ning Kei spread the thick and soft quilt on the ground and put a new pillow on it. Then he dug up the abandoned well in the courtyard and fetched water to mix the ash. He pasted all the cracks on the windows of the woodshed flat and tight without leaving a gap. Then he hung a thick black cloth on the windows and the door. It was already dark. He reached out to hang down the two black cloths, then walked out of the room and said, "Done." He heard the slight sound of fire in the room. He carefully observed and found that no light leaked out, so he nodded. Many years ago, he took Sang Sang to hunt in Min Mountain and squatted in the snow to ambush wild boars. Wild boars were particularly sensitive to light and human smells. The temporary squatting spot he'd built in the snow could be tightly sealed without a trace of light and his own smell. Now, it was not difficult to use it to deal with these things. The night was dark, and the small courtyard was still gloomy. No one dared to approach it. Even if they did, they would only see the same shabby scene as before. There was no trace of anyone who had been here. The Buddhism sect was looking for the black horse carriage everywhere, trying to find Ning Ke and Sang Sang. Numerous powerhouses from Haoyan Taoism were lying in ambush in the Pamir Mountains, which was the only route to the Tang Empire. Who would have thought that the daughter of Yama was in a small courtyard so close to the White Tower Temple? A black crow landed on a tree in the courtyard and looked up at the stars. Song Song's portrait was everywhere in Chaoyang City. People gathered in front of every Buddhist temple. The monks were telling the legend of the underworld, the last words of Buddha, and the story of the daughter of Yama. The people of Yueluan Kingdom had complicated expressions. Some were frightened, and some were sad and angry. The Buddha's teaching to not be angry was all forgotten. Gradually, the crowd became excited. People waved their fists and said that they would find the daughter of Yama and burn her to death. Ninkei walked on the street. The discussion and anger of the crowd, as well as the most vicious curses against Sang Sang, did not affect him at all. It did not take long for him to arrive at the Ceremony Hotel. The envoy of the Tang Empire to the Yueluan Kingdom was in the Ceremony Hotel. He did not enter the Ceremony Hotel. Instead, he stood in a slightly quieter back alley and listened attentively to the movements in the courtyard wall before deciding what to do. This is not self-preservation. It's not surrender. It's right or wrong. The Tang Empire is the leader of the world. Of course, we don't care about the pressure from the Yueluan Kingdom. Even the West Hill Divine Palace can't make us retreat. But I can't watch the world perish like this. This is the responsibility that the Tang Empire should bear. Ning Ke stood quietly in the alley outside the wall and listened for a while. This was the most useful piece of information he heard. The person who spoke was the envoy of the Tang Empire to the Yueluan Kingdom. He slowly lowered his head and turned to leave. Sang Sang looked at the expression on his face and knew that the situation was not good. She reached out and held his hand. Ning Ke smiled bitterly and said, "I'm fine. I was just a little surprised to hear something." Sang Sang asked, "What is it?" Ning Ke said, "Guess how long it has been since we left the Lang Temple." Sang Sang thought for a while and said, "At least a month." "Wrong, it's a year." Ning Ke touched her slightly cold face and said, "A year has passed unknowingly. Then I still have the patience to endure another half a year. Tomorrow, I will take you to the White Tower Temple to read the Buddhist scriptures." The first half of his and Song Song's lives were extremely difficult, even miserable. But it was also those difficult days that made them who they were now. They had courage, perseverance, indifference, and patience that ordinary people could not imagine. 10 years ago, deep in the snow-covered Min Mountain, Ning Ke carried Sang Sang on his back and squatted in the snow cellar to kill a wild boar. Unexpectedly, a winter bear that was awakened unexpectedly appeared. After the bear killed the wild boar and ate its fill, it seemed to notice that there was still food nearby and refused to leave. It stayed near the snow cellar for a few days, relying on the wild boar's carcass. At that time, Ning Ke was not strong enough, and Sang Sang was only a 6-year-old girl. It was impossible for them to defeat a greedy winter bear. They had no other choice but to hide in the snow cellar and pray. Their prayers to Hao Yin would never be answered, but waiting beyond the endurance of ordinary people could always be exchanged for success. In the end, the winter bear could not resist the hunger and left bitterly. When Ning Ke climbed out of the snow cellar with the dying Sang Sang on his back, they had stayed in the snow cellar for 4 days and 4 nights. In that case, he and Sang Sang could survive. Why couldn't they survive now? Ning Ke looked out of the window at the gradually thinning autumn sky and the thickening autumn clouds and thought silently. On the tree in the small courtyard, the black crow cawed, which was very unpleasant to hear. Ning Ke and Sang Sang disappeared from the world again. They had disappeared for a whole year, But at that time, the Buddhism and Taoism sects guessed that they were either dead or in the chessboard world left by Buddha. No one was shocked when they could not find any trace of them, nor did they think it was incredible. However, now that they had left the chessboard world of Buddha and returned to the human world, they disappeared again. The powerhouses of the Buddhism and Taoism sects and countless people in the world tried all methods, but could not find any trace of them. They could not help but be shocked and vigilant to the extreme. After all, many people were even monitoring the academy now. An old monk slowly walked out of the giant sinkhole in the depths of the western wilderness and walked forward. The old monk wore a bamboo hat, obscuring his face. He held a monk's staff in his hand and walked very slowly. It was not a deliberate slowness to appear calm and indifferent. Instead, it was as if his feet were tightly connected to the desolate and boundless earth. Every step he took was naturally slow and difficult. The monk's staff in his hand kept tapping on the ground, as if he was looking for something or someone in the wilderness. However, he walked so slowly, who could he find? However, the moment he walked out of the giant sinkhole, he seemed to find something and said, "The palace." A distant bell rang in the yellow temple between the giant peaks in the center of the giant sinkhole. In the right king's palace thousands of miles away, a dusty scholar looked at Chanyu and a dozen palace priests who were on guard. He bowed slightly and said, "May I ask if you have seen my younger brother?" More than 10 miles away, the vice monk of the Hall of Respect of Xiankong Temple rushed to the palace with 30 ascetic monks. The old monk continued to walk slowly. After walking for half a day, he stopped and said, "Liuguan." The bell rang again in the yellow temple between the giant peaks in the center of the giant sinkhole. The scholar appeared in Liuguan, a famous trading center at the edge of the wilderness. 1,000 grassland cavalries and several Yuan kingdom cavalries received military orders and galloped to Liuguan. The old monk continued to walk. One day later, he stopped and said another place. The president of the Hall of Respect of Xiankong Temple quietly looked at the scholar under the poplar tree not far away. Eldest brother looked at the thick bark of the poplar tree and understood what had happened. Regardless of the danger of falling into a lower state, he used the distanceless ability to search for his youngest brother's traces everywhere, while the Buddhism and Taoism sects sent people to follow him. Even if he found Ning Ke, he would not be able to take him away quietly. He would have to face the continuous attacks of the Buddhism and Taoism sections. No cultivator could keep up with the limitless state and accurately find him every time. Two conditions must be met at the same time. The other party must have enough powerhouses or troops and be prepared near all the places he could reach. At the same time, the other party must be able to know where he was in the shortest time possible. Logically speaking, it was impossible to fulfill these two conditions at the same time. However, when the entire human world was searching for Sang Sang, and when the Buddhist and Taoist sects joined hands with the entire secular world, they could really send out a sufficient number of experts or armies, and someone could fulfill the second condition. Eldest brother looked gentle and dull, but he was actually very smart. It only took him a short time to understand everything and confirm his guess. The chief preaching monk of Xiankong Temple had finally come to the human world. He looked at Chi Mei and smiled slightly. He sat down against the poplar tree and took out the old book from his waist to read. There was no pond beside him to scoop water with, but he still looked calm. Since the Buddhism and Taoism sects tried to determine the location of Ning Ke and Sang Sang through him, he decided to do nothing but read, eat, and sleep from this moment on. Doing nothing was the best way to hide. On the contrary, the more you try to hide, the easier it would be for you to be exposed. Eldest senior brother did not understand this principle, but he acted according to his heart's desire and naturally made the best choice. Ning Ke had a lot of experience in hiding and escaping. He understood this and did the same. Other than taking Sang Sang to various Buddhist temples to read scriptures and cure diseases, he never left the small courtyard or even went to find eldest brother. Sang Sang's illness was slightly better, or did not get worse for the time being. She was still listless and fell into a deep sleep just after noon. Ning Ke sat by the bed and began to read. This book was the handwritten notes of Buddha in the Lang Temple. He arranged the words of the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of Arcane and the side notes of Buddha in order to make it easier to read. However, he still could not understand more at that time. These days, Ning Ke took Sang Sang to several Buddhist temples and vaguely understood something. So he read the notes again and frowned slightly. He said to himself, "The night comes because of the moon. Doesn't this mean that the cause and effect are reversed? The shadow of the night falls on the moon and can no longer be washed away. What does this mean?" He looked at Sang Sang, who was sleeping soundly. He looked at her pale little face and reached out to touch it. He thought that the shadow of the night mentioned in the Ming hand scroll was naturally the daughter of Yama, which was Sang Sang. The shadow of the night falls on the moon and can no longer be washed away. From the literal meaning and the current situation, the moon naturally referred to himself. In the whole world, he was indeed the only one who had seen the moon. Ning Ke was thoughtful and seemed to understand something, but he was still confused. A few unpleasant cawing sounds came from outside the window. He made sure that no one was outside and pushed the door to the courtyard. Looking at the black crows on the tree, he frowned slightly. On the first night, he came to the small courtyard. A crow flew over. In the following days, a black crow flew over every day. Gradually, there were more and more black crows, and the branches were almost unable to bear their weight. No matter how he looked at it, there was something strange about it. He looked up at the sky and found that there were more and more clouds above Chaoyang City. Those clouds had been slowly approaching and merging into a thick cloud layer that covered the sky. As the cloud layer thickened, people in the city finally felt a trace of coldness. Autumn was finally coming to an end. For Ning Ke and Sang Sang, the autumn of the previous year and this year were connected. In these two autumns, too many things had happened to them. How could they not feel sad? Volume 3, The End of Eventful Times, to be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 618. The wind and snow were not raging, and the road was not blocked. Accompanied by the slowly falling snowflakes, an old monk with a monk's staff and a bamboo hat slowly walked out of the wilderness. He entered the Yuelin kingdom and walked towards a low mountain peak. The old monk walked very slowly, slower than the falling snowflakes, and even slower than the melting snow. The soles of his straw sandals seemed to be glued to the ground. When he lifted his feet, it seemed like he was pulling up the entire ground, so every step he took was very difficult. When he walked on the snow, the layer of snow was pulled up. When he walked on the muddy ground, the black muddy ground was pulled up. When he walked on the bluestone mountain path, the stone surface was pulled up. The mountain path that was covered in light snow seemed unchanged, but in fact, the structure deep inside the snow was constantly tearing, making extremely faint rustling sounds that humans could not hear. Even the entire mountain peak was groaning along with the old monk's footsteps. The animals hiding in the depths of the mountains to avoid the winter could hear the sound. The wolves licking their dirty fur raised their heads in alarm. The magpies hiding in their nests looked up in horror into the distance. The lynx that was trying to chew through the skin of a frozen deer let out a shrill scream. The old monk walked to the top of the mountain and looked towards the south. 10 miles south of the mountain peak, the snow stopped. Most of the sky in the Yuelin kingdom was devoid of snow clouds. However, the capital of the Yuelin kingdom, Chaoyang City, was covered by thick clouds. Looking at it from 1,000 miles away, the thick cloud was like a lonely flower in the boundless Buddhist kingdom. The old monk looked at the cloud in silence. The shadow of the bamboo hat did not cover his aged face. A very complicated expression slowly appeared on his face. Then he tightened his grip on the monk's staff and gently inserted it into the rock beside him. He looked into the distance and said, "Man is under the cloud." When the staff came into contact with the rocks on the peak, it was like a hot knife stabbing into a pile of snow. Without a sound, it penetrated deep into the rocks. The head of the staff made a slight crisp sound. Accompanied by the old monk's words, it floated in all directions. The old monk looked at the distant Chaoyang city and said, "Regarding the catastrophe of the human world, and the coming of the Dharma ending age. The Buddha left many instruments, such as the chessboard and bell, before his nirvana to point out the path for the Buddhist disciples. However, you refused to follow the path left by the Buddha and wanted to walk your own path. Why is that? After standing silently on the peak for a long time, the old monk sighed and said, "Senior brother, I never understood why you called yourself Mount Chishan. After Qin Yin explained it to me, I realized that it was a divergent road. However, the divergent road is difficult to walk. Buddha is merciful. How can he bear to see the world take the risk of taking a divergent road?" After saying this, the old monk pulled his staff out of the snow rock and slowly walked down the peak. It seemed that he was going to Chaoyang City. However, it took him more than 100 days to reach the edge of the wilderness from the Xiankong Temple in the giant sinkhole at such a slow and arduous way of walking. How long would it take for him to reach the cloud? "You took the wrong path, so I have to take the shortcut." The old monk walked out of the range of the peak and stopped in his tracks. He stretched out his staff on the side of the rugged and muddy mountain path. From his actions, he seemed to be calling for a carriage. However, how could there be a carriage in such a remote mountain where few people tread? This winter, Chaoyang City, the capital of the Yueluan Kingdom, had continuous gloomy weather. Even after 2 light snowfalls, the thick clouds above the city did not disperse. In the human world, wind and snow were common. Even 100 days of gloomy weather was not difficult to imagine. Therefore, in the beginning, the clouds did not attract anyone's attention. It was not until the winter deepened and the second snowfall dispersed that the countryside outside of Chaoyang City suddenly cleared up. It was clear and bright, but Chaoyang City was still covered with thick clouds. This puzzled the people in the city. If there was something they did not understand, they had to find out. Once they started observing, the imperial court and ordinary citizens of the Yueluan Kingdom finally noticed the strangeness of the thick clouds in the sky. Some people remembered that the clouds above their heads had not dissipated since a certain day in late autumn. More people noticed that in the clear sky outside the city, there were still clouds floating over every day and gathering in the clouds above the city. The clouds shrouded Chaoyang City and refused to disperse. They became thicker and larger every day. This situation was too strange. Since autumn, the Buddhist temples in the Yueluan Kingdom had announced the arrival of the daughter of Yama. The imperial court's arrest warrant had proved that the daughter of Yama was in the Yueluan Kingdom. All these things were connected to the thick clouds above Chaoyang City, which immediately deepened the uneasiness and fear in the hearts of the people. The people of Chaoyang City naturally had many speculations and uneasiness. The clouds became the focus of everyone's attention. It even became the main topic of conversation between the citizens of the Yueluan Kingdom every day. "Did you see the clouds yesterday? I can see them every day when I look up. Why do I have to look? I mean the new clouds that floated in from outside yesterday. Didn't you notice that the clouds are much thicker today? I didn't notice it. I want to rent a carriage yesterday. The new clouds were quite big yesterday. Very big. When I saw it, it was already very close. It must be bigger than the Imperial Palace. That's not small. But I saw a new cloud coming from the east a few days ago. TSK, TSK. That formation, that spirit, it felt like thousands of Tang soldiers and horses. That's a good analogy. Isn't the daughter of Yama a Tang? Don't mention the daughter of Yama to me. I'm a coward. You're not a coward. You're a careful person. You rented a carriage in advance of leaving, right? I have to leave. The clouds are too strange. If one day they turn into stones and fall down, I won't be able to withstand it. Snowy clouds ravage the city. The people in the city would look up for a long time every day. There were fewer and fewer people suffering from cervical spondylosis. Many people began to pray. The streets were filled with the smell of incense. The temples received more and more incense money. Some people were already preparing to leave Chaoyang City and hide with relatives in the countryside for a few days. The business of the carriage house became more and more prosperous. The uneasy atmosphere grew stronger as the incense burned. People panicked and began to pray to anything that they thought was effective. Whether it was a stone or a tree, the master in the temple was naturally the best choice. Thus, in just a few days, no one knew how many young ladies in their mansions had been harmed. There were countless Buddhist temples in the Yueluan kingdom, among which the most famous were the 72 temples in Misty Rain. The White Tower Temple in Chaoyang City had an unquestionable position among the 72 temples. In the current situation, where people were in a state of panic, the White Tower Temple was naturally the most popular. Every day, the number of believers who came to pray to the Buddha almost overwhelmed the Buddhist temple. All the halls in the White Tower Temple were filled with believers. Even outside the temple, there were countless people kneeling. Dozens of believers knelt respectfully in front of a stone step outside the temple. They kept kowtowing and looked especially pious. The reason why the stone steps attracted so many Buddhist believers was because the abbot of the White Tower Temple had picked up a baby boy with a deep affinity with Buddha on the stone steps in the morning. The baby boy was the famous Master Dao Shi, so the believers believed that the stone steps still had the Buddha nature of Master Dao Shi, which could bring them good fortune. Looking at this scene, Ning Ke shook his head. Holding Song Song's slightly cold hand, they squeezed through the crowd and walked into the White Tower Temple. He thought to himself that Kuni Mati and Bao Shu had an affair and gave birth to an illegitimate son, Dao Shi. Naturally, he had to be sent to the White Tower Temple. What did it have to do with Buddhism? Sang Sang wore a light-colored cotton-padded jacket and a thick scarf that covered half of her face. Her hair had been cut very short and parted diagonally in front of her forehead. She looked very refreshing, like a playful little boy. Even those who had seen her in person would not be able to recognize her, let alone those who had only seen her portrait. Maybe that stone step can really bring blessings. Song Song's voice penetrated through the scarf and sounded a little muffled, as if she had caught a cold. Ning Ke smiled and said softly, "Even if there are blessings, they will not fall on us. Don't forget that in front of the bun shop in Chong, and I chopped off Dao Shi's head." Sang Sang said, "I don't know if it's because we have done too many bad things. If I had known that I was going to learn Buddhism, I would not have been so disrespectful to the Buddhist masters." Ning Ke smiled and said, "The day before I met Dao Shi, you ran away from home for the first time. I was in a very bad mood and was angry for the whole night by Yiming Lake. He still came to provoke me. Naturally, he was courting death. It's all your fault." Sang Sang said softly, "So it's my retribution. If there was really retribution, Xiaohe would not have needed me to kill him. He would have been killed by Buddha long ago." Whether it is Haoqian Taoism or the Buddhism sect, when they talk about the academy, they will always mention the term non-believer. In their eyes, without faith and reverence, it is difficult to live a fulfilling life, and it is difficult to find true peace in one's heart. However, in the eyes of the academy, faith and worship are not the same thing. The word fear and reverence needs to be carefully studied. Ning Ke thought of the believers who kept kowtowing outside the temple and the scene of the family next to the small courtyard burning incense and worshipping a tree every day. He said, "Countries like the Yueluan kingdom naturally have faith, but there are too many things to believe in and too much fear of the unknown. What kind of faith is that?" As they chatted in a low voice, the two had already walked to the main hall in the depths of the White Tower Temple. The hall was still crowded with hundreds of believers kneeling on futons, listening to an eminent monk preaching in front of them. Ning Ke led Sang Sang into the hall and quietly found an empty futon. The believer whose futon had been stolen was listening attentively to the sutra a moment ago, but the next moment he found himself standing behind a pillar. He was shocked and speechless, but he did not dare to shout, for fear that the eminent monks in the temple would think that he was not pious enough and ended up like this. Sang Sang knelt on the futon and put her hands together in front of her. She closed her eyes and began to listen to Buddhism. She looked quiet and pious. Her hair, which was slightly black because it was cut short, slowly swayed on her forehead. She did not listen to the White Tower Temple's preaching, but only silently recited a passage in her heart. She was not learning the solemn golden Buddha in front of the hall, but the Buddha in her heart. "I came back full of energy and aching all over." This is the first chapter of today, and also the first chapter of the 4th volume. The curtain slowly lowered, but in fact the real curtain was slowly lifted. Let's finish it together. I will try to finish the next chapter before 10:10. To be continued. If you like this work, please come come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 619. Find the daughter of Yama, save the world, and save themselves. This was what everyone in the world was thinking. After confirming that the daughter of Yama was hiding in the Ueluan kingdom, the Buddhism sect naturally wanted to get rid of Sang Sang. Even under such circumstances, Ning Ke hid in Chaoyang City with Sang Sang, visited many Buddhist temples inside and outside the city, and calmly studied Buddhism and read scriptures. This was completely out of the Taoism and Buddhism sect's expectations. It also proved that the most dangerous place was the safest place. Compared to this, there was something more wonderful. Buddha had read the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane many years ago and could see the coming of the everlasting night in the Dharma ending age. For this, Buddha had left countless celestial weapons and prepared many methods to suppress the son of Yama, so that the human world could escape from Yama's gaze. However, even Buddha would not have thought that the Dharma he left in the human world could help Sang Sang temporarily suppress the cold aura in her body. The chanting of sutras filled the temple. A peaceful and compassionate aura gradually spread with the devout prayers of the believers. Sang Sang closed her eyes and put her palms together. Her expression was tranquil and devout. She cultivated her own Buddhism, read her own sutras, and felt the peaceful and compassionate aura around her. Her pale face gradually returned to normal. The senior monk of the White Tower Temple finished his lecture, and so did the believers. Hundreds of people on the futons in the temple chanted the name of Buddha, but they did not disperse. The senior monk began to lead the believers to pray. The content of the prayer was very complicated, but if one listened carefully, there were only two things. The first was to pray for the Buddha to appear and help the countries in the Central Plains to chase away the barbaric and bloody desolate man tribes from the wilderness. The second was to pray for the Buddha to appear and quickly find the daughter of Yama, and then suppress her so that she would never be able to rise again. After the prayer, Ning Ke walked into the temple and helped Sang Sang up. In the Buddhist temples and even the streets of Chaoyang City, such prayers with fear and the most vicious curses could be heard. He was already used to it, so he was calm. However, as the target of the curse, Sang Sang was inevitably a little depressed. Just as Ning Ke and Sang Sang walked out of the White Tower Temple, they suddenly heard the melodious bell ringing from the eaves of the temple behind them. The bell rang continuously for a long time, sounding very solemn. Which big shot has arrived? Ning Ke turned his head and looked into the depths of the White Tower Temple. He thought that the person who could make the White Tower Temple ring so many bells must be extraordinary. He was afraid that it was either someone from the Shinkong Temple or a powerhouse from the West Hill Divine Palace. There could only be one purpose for a high monk from the Shinkong Temple or a powerhouse from the West Hill Divine Palace to appear in Chaoyang City at this time. He frowned and became more vigilant. If Ning Ke knew the real meaning of these bells, he would definitely be more vigilant. If he had the chance to hear the voice behind the bells, he would definitely leave Chaoyang City with Sang Sang immediately. In the depths of the Buddhist temple, the bells slowly stopped ringing. In a remote Buddhist hall, the abbot of the White Tower Temple and a few elders of extremely high seniority knelt respectfully on the ground. An old and peaceful voice echoed in the hall. Beneath the clouds, winter was coming to an end. In many countries in the world, such as the Great River Kingdom or the South Jin Kingdom, spring had already covered both sides of the river. In the Lang Temple on the Wa Mountain that was being rebuilt, wildflowers were also in full bloom. But there were more places that were waiting for the arrival of spring. For example, the capital of the Ueluan Kingdom, which was already full of spring in the past years, was still in the final stages of winter because of the clouds that covered the sky for hundreds of days and the relatively low temperature. In the depths of the wilderness in the far northeast, the desolate man tribe was constantly hurt by the cold and betrayal. The wilderness, which had been extremely turbulent and bloody for the past year, once again welcomed a tragic war after a few dozen days of peace. Countless lives were coldly harvested. In the late autumn, the Desolate Man tribe had just reached an alliance agreement with the Left King's palace. Both parties swore a blood oath with their respective tribes' ancestral spirits. The senior statesmen of the Desolate Man tribe were slightly relieved and were planning to join forces with the Left King's palace to attack the Central Plains Coalition Army in the coming spring and summer. However, the Desolate Man did not expect that the Left King's palace would dare to betray their own ancestral spirits. In the middle of winter, the Left King's palace brazenly tore up the alliance agreement that had not even dried yet. They joined hands with the West Hill Divine Palace and received a large batch of provisions from the grassland. Then, they led the Central Plains Coalition Army and ventured 800 miles to the north against the bitter cold. They launched a surprise attack on the second largest settlement of the Desolate Man's tribe. Although the Desolate Man were brave and extremely strong, and every adult was a natural warrior, there were too few of them. The whole year of war had sharply reduced the winter rations they had stored. It was almost as if they were fighting with half an empty stomach. In the face of the sneak attack by the Left King's palace and the West Hill Divine Palace, especially the assassination of a large number of powerful cultivators, the Desolate Man could only hold on for 3 days no matter how brave they were. They had to leave thousands of warriors' corpses and were forced to leave. The Left King's palace and the West Hill Divine Palace's coalition army did not stop moving forward. They knew how strong the Desolate Man's vitality was and how firm their will to fight was. Although the sneak attack from thousands of miles away had successfully damaged the strength of the Desolate Man tribe, no one could guarantee how strong the Desolate Man tribe will be next year or a few years later if they did not completely defeat the Desolate Man. Under the fierce request or cold threat of the silver-masked military counselor, the West Hill Divine Palace's coalition army followed the cavalry of the Left King's palace and continued to move north. The generals from the Yin Kingdom and the South Jin Kingdom were shocked to find that the West Hill Divine Palace seemed to have known the military counselor's true identity. They even listened to him, just like the fatuous Chanyu of the Left King's palace. The chase in the harsh winter, which was too cruel for both sides, lasted for 5 days. On the snow-covered wilderness, the frozen corpses of the Central Plainsmen, barbarians, and Desolate Men were scattered everywhere. The corpses were so hard that the vultures were unwilling to eat them. After death, they could finally live together peacefully. On the 5th night of the bitter and cruel pursuit, Tang, the world wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine, finally managed to sneak into the camp without being noticed by the dozen array tactical masters that the West Hill Divine Palace had placed outside the military camp. In the tent in the wind and snow, Tang did not see the panicked generals from various countries, nor did he see the shrieking secretaries. What he saw were dozens of cultivation powerhouses from various countries who were already prepared, and the military counselor sitting behind the desk. The military counselor wore a silver mask. There were 2 bowls of cool wine on the desk. His face that was not covered by the mask looked calm and natural, as if he was a good host who had been waiting for a long time for a guest, but was not anxious. Tang knew who the military counselor was. He looked around at the powerhouses in the tent and said, "It seems that you are indeed the one in charge of the Left King's palace. No wonder those barbarians dared to betray their ancestors. But in my opinion, no matter what happened to you, you are still a coward. So you will never be able to catch up with Ning Quebec." Long Qing did not continue Tang's words. He pointed at the 2 bowls of wine on the desk and said calmly, "After I left China that year, I never drank again. It was not because I was afraid of making mistakes, but because I could not find anything in the world that was worth drinking for, until I found out that you might come to kill me." Tang asked, "Being killed by me is indeed something worth celebrating." Long Qing shook his head and said calmly, "I'd already guessed that you would come to kill me like how you killed Xia Ho. Since you are still so stupid, I will not be as stupid as Xia Ho, who cherishes the lives of his subordinates. So naturally, you will be killed by me. Of course, it is something worth celebrating that I have killed the world wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine and the number 1 powerhouse of the Desolate Man. After you die, I will ask the generals to stab a spear into your head and patrol in front of the battle. Although it may not shake the fighting spirit of the desolate man, it can make their brains more difficult to use. They will not try to continue to escape to the north. Then this pursuit will become the final battle. He looked at Tang with a smile and continued, "After you die, the devil's doctrine will be gone, and so will the desolate man. If I were you, I would not put myself in danger no matter what. However, I still want to thank you for letting me become the person who ended the history of the devil's doctrine and the history of the desolate man." Then, in the history books of the future, whether it is Kuhauren who broke into the devil's doctrine with a single sword or the Tang cavalry 1,000 years ago, they will all be below me. Tang looked at Long Qing, who was behind the desk, and said, "I admit that you are very good at commanding on the battlefield. I also admit that your thinking is more complicated than mine. However, your level is still too low, so there are many things that you will never understand. Not to mention the Tang cavalry and Mr. Ku 1,000 years ago. The current you is not even comparable to Xia Ho." Long Qing's eyes lit up slightly and said, "Please enlighten me." Tang slowly raised his right hand and clenched it into a fist. The animal skin that bound the iron fist creaked and said, "If it is an ambush, then you need to kill me. If you can't kill me today, then it can only be called an ambush. There have been countless ambushes in the past thousands of years. Those that could be written in the history books are all jokes." Long Qing's eyes became brighter and brighter. He said, "I know that you are very powerful. I have prepared for a long time for this. I can't think of any reason why I can't kill you with my current combat power." The wind and snow were blowing hard at night. The tent was torn into countless ropes. The sound of the fist wind sounded like thunder. The bright sword light shuttled back and forth like lightning. The black peach blossoms bloomed and then disappeared. The leather ropes on Tang Yi's iron fists were all broken. On his body that was like cast iron, there were countless wounds left by flying swords. His entire body was dyed with blood. He had suffered unimaginable injuries. But in the end, he still successfully rushed out of the camp that stretched for more than 10 miles, disappearing into the wind and snow. In this battle, 200 elite cavalrymen of the left king's palace died. 11 cultivators at the upper see-through state from the central plains were torn into pieces. 2 priests of the left king's palace were shaken into blood foam. A powerhouse at the peak of the knowing destiny state from Haotian Taoism, who had lived in seclusion in the kingdom of Song for many years, had a bloody hole the size of a bowl in his chest and abdomen. He died with his eyes open. Long Qing's natal peach blossom was smashed into pieces by a simple iron fist. He was thrown far away and vomited blood. His silver mask and black robe were completely dyed red. Before the battle, Long Qing could not understand why Dun was still confident that he could survive, given the combat strength at that time. After the battle ended, he supported his weak and injured body to review and deduce for a long time, but he still could not understand why he could not kill Dun. Just as Tang had said, Long Qing was now at the upper knowing destiny state. Although his plans were excellent and accurate, he was still far from the cavalry of the Tang Empire thousands of years ago. He was not as good as Xiaoho and was not qualified to be mentioned in the same breath as Mr. Ku. Because his level was not high enough, he did not understand people like Tang. Once they fell into a situation that made them crazy, they would often make their enemies crazy. Sometimes, there was no reason at all. After this battle, many powerhouses of the coalition army were killed and injured. They had no choice but to stop chasing the desolate man's tribe and slowly retreat to the south. The countries of the Central Plains and the left king's palace began to get nervous. This time, the desolate man's tribe suffered heavy losses. No one knew how many women and children were killed, but they were not completely destroyed by the coalition army. According to the desolate man's character, once they recovered, they would definitely launch the bloodiest revenge against the left king's palace and the Central Plains coalition army. No matter how one looked at it, Long Qing was the one who gained the most from this bitter winter war. Through the agreement with the West Hill Divine Palace before the war, the left king's palace had gained a lot of benefits. They had even obtained several important resources from the Yin Kingdom. Their power had increased rapidly, and his control over the left king's palace had been further strengthened. Most importantly, Through the communication with the West Hill Divine Palace, Longqing realized that the Divine Hall did not care about his betrayal. The Hierarch Lord had even secretly conveyed some extremely important information. He had killed the Halfman Taoist in the Jisho Abbey, absorbed his power, and betrayed Haotian Taoism. As someone from the West Hill Divine Palace, he was very clear about the terrifying power of Haotian Taoism. Therefore, being chased by the Divine Hall had always been the greatest fear in his heart. Now that this fear had finally disappeared, he naturally felt refreshed. However, as the old fear faded, new fear arose. In the ambush that night in the wind and snow, Tang's image had left a deep impression on Longqing, and he could not suppress his fear. The only comfort he could feel was that among those who had survived that battle, Tang had suffered the heaviest injury. Logically speaking, he would definitely die. Even if he could survive, he would have to focus on recuperating in the following period of time. It was impossible for him to pose a specific threat to Longqing. The Desolate Man would definitely launch a bloody revenge. In order to prepare for the real war, the countries in the Central Plains had begun to prepare their provisions and troops. The South Jin Kingdom Royal Cavalry and the Divine Hall's Papal Cavalrymen, who had not participated in the war all these years, had begun to prepare to enter the wilderness. Even the two border armies of the Tang Empire had begun to prepare for battle. But even so, the people's attention on the Yueluan Kingdom did not weaken at all. On the contrary, it became more and more intense, especially those powerhouses who had stayed here all along and did not even glance at the wilderness. The war between the Central Plains Coalition Army and the Desolate Man would determine the outcome of the war between civilizations. However, the matter of the Yueluan Kingdom would determine the survival of the entire world. Everyone knew which was more important. Many days had passed, but no one had found any traces of the Black Horse carriage. The ascetic monks that the Xiankong Temple had scattered in the northeast wilderness gradually moved towards the Yueluan Kingdom. In a Zen temple more than 100 miles north of Chaoyang City, the chief monk of the Xiankong Temple's Hall of Respect, Master Chi Mei, was quietly listening to the voice in front of the Buddha statue. He is under the clouds. The clouds above Chaoyang City had not dispersed and had already attracted the attention of many cultivators. Many powerhouses from the Buddhist and Taoist sects had already quietly sneaked into the city. At this time, after hearing the voice of the chief monk of Scripture, Chi Mei no longer hesitated. He rushed to Chaoyang City that night and entered the White Tower Temple. The next morning, the commander of the West Hill Divine Palace Divine Guards, Luo Kadi, also rushed to Chaoyang City with 18 Divine Guards. At this time, a cloud floated in the blue sky outside the city and merged into the thick clouds above the city. The clouds above Chaoyang City were getting thicker and thicker. It was very difficult for sunlight to pass through, so it looked darker and darker. There was a feeling of dark clouds pressing down on the city, but no one knew when it would really snow or rain. Inside the White Tower Temple, Chi Mei looked at the man who was as burly as a mountain in front of him. He put his palms together and bowed slowly, saying, "Greetings, Commander Luo." Luo Kadi silently sized up the seemingly ordinary middle-aged monk in front of him. His eyes fell on the monk's left hand that only had 2 fingers left on the side of the monk's leg. He nodded slightly in return. He was the most trusted subordinate of the West Hill Divine Palace Hierarch. Although he had been punished by the great Divine Priest of Judgment, Yi Hongyu, for the past 2 years because of that incident, he was still a very important bigwig in the Divine Hall. He had entered the knowing destiny state for many years. He was powerful and arrogant, so even in front of the eminent monk from the unknown place, Xiankong Temple, he still refused to show too much respect. He even pretended to be cold and arrogant. Chi Mei's expression was calm and natural. There was no change at all. He had long achieved great success in Buddhism, so he would not be disturbed by these external things. He said, "I heard that the great Divine Priest of Judgment had left Peach Mountain 100 days ago. Where is she now?" Luo Kadi frowned and said, "The great Divine Priest has gone to the northeast." Chi Mei sighed softly and said, "That's not good." Luo Kadi said, "If Ning Kei and the daughter of Yama are really in Chaoyang City, we could just find them and kill them. What's wrong with that?" Chimei said, "There are too few people from Haotian Taoism this time. I don't know if it's because the Abbey Dean is traveling overseas or for some other reason. This time, when the daughter of Yama appeared, you guys did not respond appropriately." Luo Kadi frowned slightly and said in a low voice, "We don't need too many people to kill Ninkei. Besides, do you think that the 18 divine guards and I are too weak?" Chimei said, "In the battle at the Lang Temple, even senior brother Qin Yin and Mr. Yi could not stop Ninkei and the daughter of Yama. Why does the commander think that we can stop them?" Luo Kadi thought of what Mr. First and Second of the Academy had done in the Lang Temple. His expression turned serious, and he asked, "Will Master Qin Yin come?" Chimei said, "Senior brother Qin Yin was seriously injured in the Lang Temple and is still recuperating." Luo Kadi said, "If that's the case, what about the people from the Academy?" Chimei said, "If the people from the Academy come, the Xiankong Temple will have a solution. We're still talking about Ning, Quebec," Luo Kadi said coldly. "Although there are not many people from Haotian Taoism, there are many people in Chaoyang City. If this is a war, why should we spare our lives? The hierarch wants me to ask if the daughter of Yama can die if thousands of people die in Chaoyang City. Will the Buddhism sect do it or not?" Chimei was silent for a long time and then said, "The human world is people's home. In order to stop this catastrophe, I think no one will be unwilling to sacrifice their lives. We have no choice but to ask all living beings to help." Amended 201211210330 to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 620. Luo Kadi recalled that the middle-aged monk had said that if the academy sent someone, the Xiankong Temple would have its own way. He suddenly thought of a possibility and asked in disbelief, "Will the chief preaching monk do something?" Chimei said calmly, "My teacher will not do anything." What shocked Luo Kadi was not that the chief preaching monk of Xiankong Temple had made a move. Although this matter itself was enough to shock the entire cultivation world, he was afraid of the possible consequences. The Abbey Dean of the Jishou Abbey and the chief preaching monk of the Xiankong Temple were basically mythical figures in the Taoist and Buddhist sections. No one dared to challenge them or even speak disrespectfully to them. It was said that for many years, only the headmaster had fought with them once. The results of these two battles were clear. Since then, the Abbey Dean had left the Jishou Abbey and traveled to the South Sea. He had not set foot on land for decades, and no one had ever heard of the chief preaching monk fighting again. According to the person who told Luo Kadi, the headmaster had reached an agreement after defeating the two big shots. No matter what happened in the world, the three of them had to stay on the sidelines. The reason why it was said to be a rumor and not a legend was because this story had not spread at all. Other than the three's core disciples, only the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace and the sage of Sword Lu Bai had vaguely heard of this matter. Although Luo Kadi was the most favored follower of the West Hill hierarch, he had no right to know. However, 2 years ago, when he had knelt in front of the hierarch lord's palace and asked to marry Yi Hongyu, he was worried that he would offend Yi Su and anger the Jishou Abbey. The hierarch lord had mentioned this matter intentionally or unintentionally. The hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace was the highest leader of Haotian Taoism in the secular world. Every word and action of his had a profound meaning, and it was impossible for him to slip up. According to Luo Kadi's analysis, the hierarch lord should be trying to reassure him and improve the status of the West Hill Divine Palace in Haotian Taoism. It was even a means to compete with the Jishou Abbey. Luo Kadi was worried that the chief preaching monk of Xiankong Temple would break the agreement and provoke the headmaster to take action himself. If the headmaster really took action, wouldn't all the preparations made by the Buddhist and Taoist sects be a joke? Now that he heard Chi Mei's denial, he was slightly relieved. However, he was worried that Chi Mei would notice something, so he turned and left the temple. He led the 18 divine guards out of the White Tower Temple and walked towards the palace of the Yuelun Kingdom. Chi Mei frowned as he watched Luo Kadi's burly figure disappear into the palace. In just a moment, he could tell that the commander of the West Hill Divine Guards was in the knowing destiny state, and it was a very stable middle state. He was very powerful and should be above Ning Quebec. The divine halls of West Hill sent this person, and the divine priest of judgment also came down from the Peach Mountain. Logically speaking, they should pay enough attention to him, but he still felt that there was something wrong. A few days ago, a piece of news came from the eastern wilderness. The wayfarer of the devil's doctrine, Tang Ji, broke into the military camp and escaped with serious injuries. However, he also killed many powerful cultivators from the Central Plains. The most painful loss of the West Hill Divine Palace in that battle was the death of a powerful cultivator at the peak of the knowing destiny state who had been living in seclusion in the kingdom of Song for many years. There were only a few powerful cultivators at the peak of the knowing destiny state in the entire cultivation world. However, the West Hill Divine Palace could hide one in the Taoist temple in the kingdom of Song. How powerful was the Haotian Taoism hidden under the sea? Moreover, such a noble, powerful cultivator at the peak of the knowing destiny state actually cooperated with the allied forces to take the risk of killing the wayfarer of the devil's doctrine. The West Hill Divine Palace was willing to invest so much power and paid such a high price in the wilderness. Facing the catastrophe of the world, the West Hill Divine Palace also invested a lot of power in the Yuelan Kingdom. However, it was still too stingy in comparison. It was hard not to arouse suspicion. You were so hurt by the headmaster's stick that you still don't want to face the academy at this time? In your eyes, if the daughter of Yama is a bowl of porridge, then the Xiankong Temple is the spoon. You don't want to do anything, but you want the spoon to scoop out the porridge. Abidine, you are really calculating. Shi Mei slowly walked out of the hall. He looked up at the thick black clouds in the sky and thought silently in his heart. The people from the Xiankong Temple, the West Hill Divine Palace, and the people in countless streets. No matter how powerful Ning Ke was, he could only die. However, he killed the daughter of Yama and saved the world. No matter how unreasonable the academy was, they could not use this as an excuse to take revenge on the Buddhism and Buddhism sects. However, the story in the autumn rain at the Lang Temple a year ago had already proved that if they wanted to kill the daughter of Yama, they had to kill Ning Quebec, killing the last disciple of the headmaster. No matter whether there was a reason or not, no matter what the situation was at that time, the people on the second floor of the academy would find their own reason and then be angry. She may believe that after this, the cultivation world would be in turmoil, and the person who killed Ning Ke would eventually be killed even if he hid in the South Sea like the Abidine. Listening to the sound of scriptures in the front temple and looking at the dark clouds above, he was silent for a long time. His expression changed from worry to determination and calmness. He murmured, "If I don't enter the netherworld, who will?" Winter left and spring was coming. Everything was as usual. The thick clouds were still suspended in the sky above Chaoyang City, motionless. The smell of burning incense in the streets was still as strong. The business of the carriage and horse business was as prosperous as usual. The sound of chanting scriptures could still be heard in the back gardens of officials and rich businessmen. Only occasionally there would be news of a young lady's sudden death. Ning Ke looked calm on the surface, but he was very anxious and under great pressure. The thick clouds in the sky seemed to be pressing on him, making it difficult for him to breathe. He did not know what those thicker and darker clouds meant, but he vaguely guessed that it had something to do with Sang Sang. The pursuit, after exposing his whereabouts, made him even more uneasy. If it was only the powerhouses of Buddhism and Taoism who wanted to kill him, it would not be a big deal. What he was really vigilant about was whether the cultivation world would let the ordinary people in the secular world join in the war. He was not referring to the wanted posters and the search of the army, but to the real ordinary people, the thousands and countless ordinary people in the whole world. There had always been an unwritten rule in the cultivation world. The battle between cultivators should avoid affecting the lives of the secular world as much as possible and avoid involving the ordinary people. However, the pursuit of Sang Sang was related to the danger of the destruction of the world. Ning Ke believed that the Buddhism and Taoism would definitely not care about these rules. It was not terrible to be the enemy of the whole world, but it was terrible to be the enemy of everyone in the world. No matter where you went and what you did, you would face endless attacks. That would be the most terrible thing. Being hit by a spoon every moment and never stop being hit by a spoon. That spoon would not be broken. No matter where you hid, that spoon would find you and hit you on the head. Even if you were not hit to death, you would be tortured to death, unless you could kill the person holding the spoon. But now everyone in the world was holding a spoon in their hand. Could you kill everyone in the world? The last two sentences are about the spoon killing. I have read it before and like it very much. It is very scary. I recommend it. The sixth morning of the first chapter is changed to the fifth night, and I have also corrected some mistakes. I hope to reduce the mistakes as much as possible. In fact, there are many words in the book that I hope you can remember after reading it, because the seemingly plain narration is basically the beginning of a trap. I have written 10,000 words today, and I hope to write more tomorrow. Let's start the battle, but I will not open a single chapter. I will say it here. If you have any monthly votes, please vote for Near Night. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to come come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 6:21. Even if there are thousands of people in front of me, I will go if I want to. Ning K muttered to himself. This was a sentence that second brother once told him about youngest uncle. When he heard this sentence, he was overwhelmed with emotions and felt hot all over. However, it seemed that he had to face such a situation now. Only then did he realize that it was not so simple. Sang Sang was warming her feet with hot water. When she heard this sentence, she was slightly startled and said, "How heroic." Ning K sat on the small stool in front of the basin and lowered his head to rub her feet. He said with a smile, "When the enemy invades and the evil forces are rampant, you will be a hero no matter how you kill. Only a hero can be called hero. But now we are the villains, the legendary devils. If we kill thousands of people with a sword, it is called killing the innocent. It is cruel and evil. It has nothing to do with being a hero." Song Song's little feet were still so white, like a white lotus in the wooden basin. She looked at Ning K, who kept rubbing her feet, and asked, "Is it important to be a hero?" Ning K took off the towel from his shoulder and lifted her feet out of the basin. He dried them carefully and put them on his knees. He rubbed them again and put on thick cotton socks for her. He said, "You know me. As long as I can survive, I don't mind killing people. But it is better if I can be cool when I kill people." Sang Sang tightened the laces of his socks, turned from the chair to the bed, lifted the thick quilt, and got in. Only her little face was exposed. She stared at Ning K and asked confusedly, "What do you mean by cool?" Ning K looked at the water in the basin, which was still warm. He took off his shoes and put his feet in. He answered casually, "It means being handsome with no expression." Sang Sang asked confusedly, "How can I be handsome with no expression?" Ning K said, "Haven't you seen second brother's dead face?" Sang Sang seemed to understand and said, "Mr. Second is really handsome, but I still don't understand why it is called cool. Besides, we are all killing people. Why do we care about being handsome? You have never heard of such words as cold, arrogant, and arrogant. Naturally, you don't understand the truth. Not to mention killing people, even if you want to take a bath or go to the toilet, you could be extremely handsome." Ning K said with a smile. He got up and went outside to pour out the water for washing his feet. When he walked back to his room, he suddenly remembered something. He rummaged through his luggage for a long time and took out a wooden box. In the box were 2 pairs of glasses made of ink. He took out one and put it on the bridge of his nose. Then he walked to the bed and looked at Sang Sang expressionlessly like second brother. "Is it cool?" Sang Sang looked at him and couldn't help but laugh. Then she thought of something and looked at the hair in front of her, frowning slightly. In autumn, her hair was cut short by Ning Quebec. It looked refreshing, but it was difficult to tie her black hair after it was cut short. She tried several times with a hairpin, but failed to stop her hair from flying in front of her eyes. She puckered her lips and blew her hair away from her eyes. Suddenly, she asked absent-mindedly, "Did Mr. Six make this thing on your face and that pair of glasses together?" She might be pouting because she was drying her hair, or she might be expressing some kind of dissatisfaction and acting coquettishly. Ning Ke was startled. He took off his glasses and said, "How would I remember that?" Sang Sang said, "You have been hiding the glasses in your luggage. How could you not remember that?" Ning Ke said, "When we were about to leave the Lang Temple, you were the one who took the glasses out of your luggage and threw them to her." Sang Sang pulled the quilt higher to cover her chin, which had become thinner because of her illness. She didn't want to look too mean, but she pretended to be wronged and said, "You put the glasses in your luggage because you thought that you might meet Miss Shan Shan in the Lang Temple. So you planned to give them to her when you met her." Recently, Sang Sang occasionally got jealous and lost her temper. With Ning Ke's temperament in the past, he would have long lost control. But now, no matter how angry Sang Sang was, he just smiled, because he thought that Sang Sang was very cute. Song Song's short hair was refreshing and cute. Her two white front teeth were silly and cute. She was charming and cute when she pretended to be angry. She was cute when she frowned when she slept. She was cute when she held two long chopsticks when she ate. No matter what she did or didn't do, she was still cute. Ning Ke was in a very good mood. He reached out and messed up her short hair. He shouted, "My Sang Sang can't be so cute. Tell me, which cave did you come from?" "I'm a daughter of Yama. I am a witch." Sang Sang grabbed the edge of the quilt with both hands and opened her eyes wide. She looked at him seriously, but she couldn't help giggling. She looked extremely cute. A crow's unpleasant caw came from outside the window. Ning Ke patted her slightly cold face and said gently, "I'll go out and have a look. You go to sleep first." Sang Sang said, "Be careful." Ning Ke nodded and pushed the door into the small courtyard. It was already dusk. The sun was slowly setting in the west. The red light shone into Chaoyang City and the thick clouds in the sky, giving it a strange red color. He looked up at the thick clouds burning like a sea of fire above his head. He shook his head and left. Sang Sang put on a fur coat and climbed out of the quilt. She walked to the window and skillfully prepared to block the light. Suddenly, she saw the burning clouds in the sky. Her little hand that was pulling the curtain paused. Ning Ke didn't know what those clouds represented. He only knew that they were related to her. She didn't know what those clouds represented either, but she knew that they might mean her departure or even death. Just as the previous joke said, Sang Sang couldn't be so cute. Sang Sang just wanted to show her cutest side in the last days before her death. She hoped that she could leave Ning Ke some good memories instead of sad ones. The whole world was their enemy. Ning Ke knew that if he and Sang Sang were hiding in Chong, they would have been found and killed by the Tang Empire. Fortunately, they were hiding in Chaoyang City. The government of the Yuan Kingdom was extremely inefficient. Although the people who were devout to Buddhism feared and hated the daughter of Yama, none of them would get rid of their lazy nature to help the Buddhism sect and the government in their search. It was because of these reasons that he and Sang Sang could hide in this city for an entire winter. But now that he was alarmed, it was time to leave. Ning Ke didn't go out of the city, although he wanted to confirm whether the big black horse and the carriage were safe. He went directly to a garden behind the Imperial Palace and walked along the walls of the White Tower Temple to the side door of the Imperial Palace. He hid his body in the darkness and silently observed and listened for a long time, making the final additions to his plan. Then he walked around the streets and alleys of Chaoyang City. He held the broken big black umbrella tightly wrapped in an old cloth in his hand to confirm the direction of the aura of the powerhouses. I've recently used Sogu Wubi and changed a certain setting, so I often make mistakes between Go, Cloud, and G. I'm ashamed to report to you. This is the first chapter of today. There are 4 chapters of 12,000 words in total. The second chapter will be finished before 11:50. If I still have the strength after finishing the 4 chapters, I will revise the last chapter yesterday and try to be more detailed in the future. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.